Tonight, we embark upon a quiet journey through the intricate tapestry of a remarkable life, one that profoundly shaped the landscape of human thought and literary expression. We will explore the complete story of Fyodor Mikhailovich Dostoevsky, a name synonymous with profound psychological insight and a deep exploration of the human condition. His existence, spanning much of the 19th century, was marked by both immense suffering and extraordinary creative output, leaving an indelible mark on the world of letters. Our purpose here is to observe, to trace the contours of his experiences, from his earliest days in a Moscow hospital to his final, influential years. We will not seek drama, but rather a steady, reflective understanding of the circumstances, challenges, and inspirations that forged this towering figure. Imagine a slow turning of pages, each revealing another facet of his journey, presented with a calm neutrality, allowing the historical narrative to unfold gently. As the story of Dostoevsky's life unfurls, we invite you to simply listen, to absorb the details of his world, the intellectual currents he navigated, and the personal trials he endured. This is an invitation to quiet contemplation, a space where the weight of history can settle softly around you. Allow the steady cadence of this narrative to guide your thoughts, to inform your understanding, and ultimately to facilitate a peaceful descent into rest. We will move through time at a measured pace, exploring each significant period, each pivotal event with careful attention to detail, as maintaining a tone that is both authoritative in its historical grounding and gentle in its delivery. To truly understand the life and works of Fyodor Dostoevsky, it is essential to first quietly observe the world into which he was born. Early 19th century Russia was a land of vast plains and deep contrasts, a society fundamentally different from the Western European nations it often sought to emulate. At its core lay an agrarian economy heavily reliant on serfdom, a system that bound millions of peasants to the land and to their aristocratic masters. These serfs, though not slaves in the strict legal sense, possessed few rights, their lives often dictated by the whims of landowners. This immense social stratification formed the bedrock of Russian society, shaping economic realities and personal destinies across the empire. Politically, Russia was an absolute autocracy, ruled by the Tsar, whose authority was considered divinely ordained and largely unchallenged. Decisions emanated from the imperial court in St. Petersburg, radiating outwards to govern a sprawling, diverse realm. Local administration, often corrupt and inefficient, struggled to implement decrees across such a vast territory. This centralized, unwavering power structure created an atmosphere where dissent was carefully suppressed, and individual liberties were subordinate to the will of the state. Yet beneath this rigid surface, intellectual currents were beginning to stir, particularly among the educated elite. Ideas from the Enlightenment and the nascent Romantic movement in Europe slowly filtered into Russian universities and salons. Discussions about social justice, the role of the individual, and the future of Russia itself, though often veiled, began to emerge. These were the early whispers of reform, the first indications of a society grappling with its identity and its place in a rapidly changing world. This complex, stratified, and politically controlled environment, with its faint echoes of burgeoning intellectual inquiry, served as the inescapable backdrop for Dostoevsky's formative years, and indeed for his entire existence. Within the complex tapestry of 19th century Russia, the Dostoevsky family held a position that was, in many ways, emblematic of the emerging professional class. Fyodor Mikhailovich Dostoevsky was born on October 30th, 1821, into a family whose circumstances, while not aristocratic, were respectable and marked by intellectual aspiration. His parents were Mikhail Andreevich Dostoevsky and Maria Fyodorovna Nechayeva. Mikhail Andreevich, Fyodor's father, hailed from a clerical background, tracing his lineage back through generations of Orthodox priests. This heritage, though not wealthy, carried with it a certain dignity and an emphasis on education. Mikhail Andreevich, however, chose a different path, pursuing a career in medicine. He graduated from the Imperial Medico-Surgical Academy and, by the time Fyodor was born, held a position as a staff doctor at the Mariinsky Hospital for the Poor in Moscow. This was a charitable institution, providing care to the less fortunate citizens of the sprawling city. The family's living quarters were situated within the hospital grounds, a detail of significant consequence. From a very early age, Fyodor would have been exposed to the raw realities of poverty, illness, and human suffering, sights and sounds that would undoubtedly leave an indelible mark upon his sensitive young mind. Maria Fyodorovna Nechayeva, Dostoevsky's mother, came from a merchant family. Her background provided a contrast to her husband's more austere clerical lineage, perhaps bringing a certain warmth and practicality to the household. She was known to be a gentle and pious woman, deeply devoted to her children. Maria Fyodorovna also possessed a love for literature, particularly Russian folk tales and poetry, which she often read aloud to her children. It was from her that young Fyodor likely inherited his early appreciation for storytelling and the rich narratives of his native culture. Together, Mikhail Andreevich and Maria Fyodorovna established a home that, despite its modest physical setting within a hospital compound, was characterized by a strong emphasis on education, moral rectitude, and a deep, though sometimes stern, family bond. These origins, shaped by a father dedicated to the sick and a mother who nurtured a love for stories, provided the foundational environment for the future novelist. Fyodor Mikhailovich Dostoevsky's entry into the world occurred on October 30th, 1821, within the confines of the Mariinsky Hospital for the Poor in Moscow. This was not a typical birthplace for a child who would grow to be one of Russia's most profound literary figures. The family, consisting of his parents and eventually 7 children, resided in a small apartment annex attached to the hospital. And this unique setting profoundly shaped Dostoevsky's earliest perceptions and understanding of human existence. Their living quarters, while modest, provided a degree of comfort and stability for the Dostoevsky family. Within these rooms, a structured and disciplined environment prevailed, guided by the strict hand of his father, Mikhail Andreevich, and the gentle influence of his mother, Maria Fyodorovna. Books were present, lessons were taught, and the routines of family life unfolded. Yet, just beyond their doors, a starkly different reality existed. The daily sounds and occasional glimpses of the hospital environment would have been unavoidable. The moans of the suffering, the quiet desperation of the poor, and the ever-present shadow of illness permeated the atmosphere. This proximity to human anguish, to the stark realities faced by those on the margins of society, served as a quiet but persistent undercurrent throughout Dostoevsky's formative years. While he was shielded to a degree by the protective embrace of his family, the very air he breathed carried the echoes of hardship. He observed, perhaps without full comprehension in his earliest years, the immense chasm between his own relatively secure existence and the precarious lives of the patients just meters away. This constant, unarticulated awareness of suffering, of the fragility of life and the starkness of poverty, began to seed itself deeply within his consciousness. It was a silent education, more profound than any formal lesson, in the complexities of the human condition and the profound inequalities of his contemporary world. This early exposure, therefore, allows not merely a biographical detail, but a fundamental shaping force, quietly laying the groundwork for the compassionate and often harrowing psychological landscapes that would later define his literary masterpieces. Mikhail Andreevich Dostoevsky, Fyodor's father, stands as a figure of considerable complexity in the early life of the future author. Educated as a doctor, he diligently served the Mariinsky Hospital for the Poor, a demanding position that brought him into daily contact with illness and the struggles of the less fortunate. This professional dedication was a defining aspect of his character, reflecting a commitment to his duties and to providing for his growing family. Within the family home, Mikhail Andreevich was known for his stern demeanour and a sometimes irritable disposition. The life under his roof was characterised by a strict adherence to discipline and order. His children, including young Fyodor, were expected to follow a rigid schedule, encompassing studies, chores, and religious observance. Punishments, though not excessively cruel by the standards of the era, were a part of this upbringing, serving to enforce obedience and moral rectitude. This disciplined environment was a reflection of Mikhail Andreevich's belief in the importance of structure for character development and his desire to instill strong moral values in his offspring. Despite his strictness, Mikhail Andreevich was deeply committed to the welfare and education of his children. He personally oversaw their early schooling, ensuring they received a solid grounding in various subjects, including Latin and French. His ambition for his sons was considerable, and he spared no effort in preparing them for respectable professions. This dedication, though often expressed through a somewhat severe manner, underscored a profound sense of paternal responsibility. The atmosphere this created in the Dostoevsky household was one of quiet seriousness, punctuated by moments of tension. The children learned early to respect authority and to navigate the moods of their father. While love certainly existed within the family, it was often expressed through provision and instruction, rather than overt displays of affection from Mikhail Andreevich. This paternal influence, marked by both a demanding nature and a deep sense of duty, would leave an indelible imprint on Fyodor Dostoevsky, shaping his understanding of authority, morality, and the intricate dynamics of familial relationships, themes that would later resonate throughout his literary explorations. In gentle contrast to the strict discipline often imposed by Mikhail Andreevich, the figure of Maria Fyodorovna Dostoevskaya, Fyodor's mother, brought warmth and solace to the family home. She was a woman of delicate constitution and deeply held religious convictions, embodying a spirit of tenderness and quiet devotion. Her presence provided necessary counterbalance to the more austere aspects of the household, offering a sanctuary of comfort and understanding for her children. Maria Fyodorovna possessed a gentle nature and a compassionate heart. She was the primary source of emotional support and affection for young Fyodor, creating an atmosphere where imagination could blossom. Her love for literature, particularly the rich tapestry of Russian folklore and religious narratives, played a crucial role in sparking her son's early creative impulses. Before he could read independently, she would gather her children and recount tales of ancient heroes, mythical creatures, and the profound moral lessons embedded in the stories of the saints and the Gospels. These storytelling sessions were a cherished part of Dostoevsky's childhood. Through his mother's soft voice, he was transported to worlds beyond the confines of their Moscow apartment. He learned of the inherent struggles between good and evil, the power of sacrifice, and the redemptive potential of faith. The vivid imagery and moral complexities of these narratives were absorbed into his impressionable mind, laying foundational layers for the thematic richness that would later define his own literary works. Maria Fyodorovna's recitations were not merely entertainment, they were an informal education in ethics, spirituality, and the vast panorama of human experience as understood through a traditional Russian lens. Her devout faith was another significant influence. She instilled in her children a profound respect for religious traditions and a sense of spiritual wonder. The rituals of the Russian Orthodox Church, observed with quiet reverence, became an integral part of Fyodor's early life, fostering a sensitivity to spiritual dimensions that would permeate his later explorations of human nature and destiny. Maria Fyodorovna, though she passed away when Fyodor was relatively young, left an enduring legacy. Her gentle spirit, her love for stories, and her quiet piety provided a vital emotional and imaginative foundation. She cultivated a space where empathy and wonder could thrive, offering a refuge from the harsher realities of life and inspiring a nascent writer to explore the depths of the human soul through the power of narrative. Her influence was a soft, steady current that nurtured the seeds of genius, shaping the artist even before he fully recognized his own calling. Fyodor Dostoevsky was one of 7 children, and within this growing family a distinct set of relationships and interactions shaped his early worldview. Beyond his parents, his siblings formed the immediate landscape of his childhood, sharing the same confined Moscow apartment and the seasonal retreat to the small estate in Daravoye. While he had several younger sisters and brothers, it was his older brother, Mikhail, who held a particularly significant place in his emotional and intellectual development. Mikhail was just a year senior to Fyodor, and this proximity in age fostered a deep, enduring bond between them. They were more than just brothers, they were intellectual companions, sharing a nascent passion for literature, philosophy, and the grand questions of existence. Their shared interests often led to quiet discussions and joint explorations of the books available in their father's modest library. These were not boisterous exchanges, but rather thoughtful, often whispered conversations that stretched late into the evenings, away from the watchful eyes of their parents. They would read aloud to each other, discuss plots and characters, and ponder the deeper meanings embedded within the texts. And the Dostoevsky household, with its numerous children, maintained a rhythm of quiet routine. Days were structured around lessons, chores, and periods of shared recreation. Despite the underlying tension that sometimes emanated from their father and the gentle solace provided by their mother, the children largely created their own world of play and imagination. Their games, often enacted in the limited space of their apartment or the more expansive grounds of Daravoye, were imbued with the stories and characters they encountered in their reading. These shared experiences, from the solemnity of Sunday church services to the simple joys of a summer afternoon in the countryside, formed a common ground for the siblings. While Fyodor's bond with Mikhail was uniquely profound, the presence of his other brothers and sisters contributed to a complex tapestry of sibling dynamics. There were the usual childhood squabbles and alliances, moments of mutual support and occasional rivalry. Yet, through it all, there was the undeniable sense of being part of a collective unit, navigating the world together under the watchful, if sometimes distant, gaze of their parents. The influence of these early family interactions, particularly the deep intellectual companionship with Mikhail, provided Fyodor with a crucial sounding board for his developing thoughts and feelings. It was within this familial sphere that his early ideas about human relationships, social dynamics, and the intricacies of personal connection began to take shape, serving as a quiet crucible for the themes that would later resonate so powerfully in his literary creations. The intellectual atmosphere within the Dostoevsky home, though not opulent, was rich with the sounds and ideas of literature. Despite his demanding medical profession and his often severe demeanour, Fyodor's father, Mikhail Andreevich, harboured a deep appreciation for the written word. He frequently took on the role of reader, his voice filling the family's modest apartment with the narratives of Russia's great literary figures. Among the authors he favoured were Nikolai Karamzin, whose historical writings and sentimental tales were cornerstones of Russian literary tradition, and Alexander Pushkin, whose poetry and prose were already shaping the national consciousness. These were not mere recitations, they were shared experiences, this drawing the children, including young Fyodor, into worlds far beyond their immediate surroundings. The cadence of Pushkin's verse, the unfolding drama of Karamzin's histories, would have settled into the quiet room, sparking imagination and curiosity in the attentive listeners. The family's small library, though not extensive by aristocratic standards, was a treasure trove for the inquisitive mind. It contained a diverse collection of books, reflecting both Mikhail Andreevich's professional interests and his broader cultural tastes. For Fyodor and Mikhail, this library became a sanctuary, a place where they could independently explore the vast landscapes of human thought and emotion. They would pore over volumes, discovering new authors, rereading beloved passages and discussing the intricate details of plots and characters. These early encounters with literature were profoundly formative. The act of listening to his father read, the quiet hours spent with his brother amidst the pages of their small collection, ignited in Fyodor a deep and abiding passion for storytelling and reading. It was through these books that he first encountered the complexities of human nature, the grand sweep of history, and the power of language to evoke profound feeling. The narratives he absorbed during these formative years instilled in him a foundational understanding of literary craft and a nascent appreciation for the moral and psychological dimensions of human experience. This early immersion in the world of letters was not merely an educational exercise, it was the genesis of his own literary vocation, laying the essential groundwork for the monumental works he would one day create. As Fyodor and Mikhail grew, their education transitioned from the informal learning of home to a more structured and rigorous environment. Initially, their father, Mikhail Andreevich, arranged for private tutors to instruct them within the confines of their Moscow apartment. This arrangement allowed for a personalized approach, tailored to the boys' individual paces and interests, while still maintaining the family's direct oversight. The curriculum at this stage was broad, encompassing a range of subjects considered essential for the sons of a professional family in 19th century Russia. They received instruction in the fundamentals of grammar and rhetoric, honing their abilities in both Russian and Latin. Mathematics was a core component, developing their logical reasoning and problem-solving skills. Geography and history were also taught, providing a broader understanding of the world and their place within it. These early lessons, delivered by various tutors, aimed to cultivate a strong academic foundation and prepare them for more advanced studies. However, as the boys approached adolescence, their father decided a more formal institutional setting was necessary. In 1834, Fyodor and Mikhail were sent to the private boarding school of Elm-Elwy Chermak, a respected institution in Moscow. This was a significant step, marking their entry into a more disciplined and competitive academic world. The Chermak boarding school upheld a curriculum typical of preparatory institutions for the gentry and professional classes. The expectations placed upon students at Chermak were considerable. The curriculum was designed to be comprehensive and demanding, reflecting the societal value placed on a classical education. They delved deeper into Latin and French, languages considered indispensable for educated individuals in Imperial Russia, opening doors to European literature and thought. Their studies also included a more advanced exploration of Russian literature, history and geography, alongside arithmetic and eventually geometry. Life at Chermak was structured and rigorous, emphasizing not only academic achievement, but also discipline and social comportment. For children of their social standing, education was not merely about acquiring knowledge. It was about preparing for a future role in society, whether in civil service, the military, or a learned profession. The academic environment at Chermak, with its formal lessons, examinations, and the constant presence of peers, represented a distinct shift from the more intimate setting of their home. This new phase of their education would continue to shape Fyodor's intellectual development, exposing him to new ideas and the wider world beyond his family's protective sphere. In 1837, a pivotal year in Fyodor Dostoevsky's young life, he and his brother Mikhail faced a new and demanding chapter. Their father, Mikhail Andreevich, had determined that the most secure and respectable path for his sons lay within the military. Despite their fervent shared passion for literature, both were compelled to seek admission to the Nikolaev Military Engineering Institute in St. Petersburg. Fyodor, after successfully passing the entrance examinations, was enrolled in the academy in the spring of that year. The Nikolaev Military Engineering Institute was a prestigious establishment intended to train engineers for the Imperial Russian Army. The education provided there was intensely practical, focused on subjects directly applicable to military construction and strategy. Students immersed themselves in mathematics, including calculus, while his peers meticulously drafted blueprints and calculated structural loads. His mind often gravitated towards the complexities of human psychology and the narratives unfolding within the pages of novels. The rigid structure and utilitarian focus of the academy felt at odds with his imaginative and introspective nature. He found little intellectual solace in the technical drawings and strategic exercises that consumed his classmates. The atmosphere of the academy itself was austere and disciplined. Life for cadets was strictly regulated, with a fixed daily routine of lessons, drills, and military exercises. The institute, housed within the imposing walls of the Mikhailovsky Castle, a former imperial residence, exuded a sense of gravitas and order. Yet beneath this veneer of military precision, Dostoevsky cultivated his inner world. He spent his limited free time devouring books, engaging in philosophical discussions with a select few like-minded cadets, and beginning to translate literary works. Despite excelling academically in subjects he found engaging, such as Russian literature and drawing, the core engineering disciplines remained a source of disinterest, if not quiet resistance. He often felt isolated, a sensitive and artistically inclined spirit amidst a sea of future military engineers. This period in St. Petersburg marked Dostoevsky's first prolonged exposure to the vast impersonal city, a setting that would later become a powerful character in many of his most celebrated novels. The contrast between the Academy's pragmatic demands and his internal literary world deepened, laying the groundwork for his eventual, inevitable departure from a military career. The year 1837 brought not only the demands of the Engineering Academy, but also a profound personal sorrow for Fyodor Dostoevsky. In February of that year, his mother, Maria Fyodorovna, succumbed to tuberculosis. Her death, while perhaps not entirely unexpected given her long struggle with the illness, left a significant void in the Dostoevsky household. Maria Fyodorovna had been a gentle and loving presence, a counterbalance to her husband's more austere temperament. Her passing was a quiet, deep grief for the young Fyodor, who was away at the academy in St. Petersburg at the time. The loss of maternal warmth and comfort at such a formative age subtly shaped his internal landscape, adding another layer to his developing understanding of human suffering and vulnerability. Just 2 years later, in 1839, an even more traumatic event unfolded. His father, Mikhail Andreevich Dostoevsky, died under circumstances that remained shrouded in ambiguity and dark rumour. Mikhail Andreevich, after sending his 2 eldest sons to St. Petersburg, had retired to his small estate in Daravoy, intending to manage his land and serfs. His temperament, always stern, had reportedly grown harsher in his later years, exacerbated by his increasing reliance on alcohol. The official cause of death was apoplexy, a stroke. However, persistent rumours circulated that he'd been murdered by his own serfs. The details were never definitively established, but the whisper of patricide, of a rebellion against authority, would have a chilling and lasting impact on Fyodor. The thought that his father, a man of education and status, could have met such a violent end at the hands of those he commanded resonated deeply within Dostoevsky's psyche. These two losses, occurring in such close succession during his late adolescence, were foundational traumas. The death of his mother brought a sense of irreparable loss and the fragility of life. The death of his father, particularly with its grim suggestion of violence and social unrest, introduced a terrifying dimension of human depravity and the potential for chaos lurking beneath the surface of society. These events were not dramatized by Dostoevsky in his direct writings about his life, but their quiet, lasting resonance can be observed in the profound psychological depth and the recurring themes of suffering, guilt, and the dark corners of the human soul that pervade his later literary works. The world, for Dostoevsky, had become a place of deeper shadows and more acute pains. St. Petersburg, the imperial capital, presented itself as a world utterly distinct from the Moscow of Dostoevsky's childhood or the rural quiet of Darovoye. It was a city of majestic scale and grand design, its wide avenues, neoclassical palaces, and shimmering canals reflecting the ambitions of Peter the Great. The very air seemed charged with a different energy, a blend of European sophistication and Russian vastness. For the young Dostoevsky, arriving in 1837, it was an overwhelming spectacle, a place where the extremes of human existence were laid bare. Beneath the city's glittering facade of imperial power and aristocratic elegance lay a contrasting reality. St. Petersburg was also a city of damp, cramped tenements, of poverty-stricken inhabitants, and of a perpetual, melancholic mist that often veiled its grandeur. The stark juxtaposition of extreme wealth and abject destitution was not merely an observable fact. It was woven into the very fabric of the city's atmosphere, creating a pervasive sense of unease and social tension. Intellectually, St. Petersburg was a vibrant crucible of ideas. It was the heart of Russia's engagement with Western thought, a place where philosophical debates, literary discussions, and political currents flowed freely, albeit often beneath the watchful eye of the autocratic regime. Cafes and salons buzzed with new theories from France and Germany, and Russian writers were beginning to forge a distinct national literature. This intellectual ferment, combined with the city's stark social contrasts, began to profoundly shape Dostoevsky's worldview. Petersburg would become more than just a setting for Dostoevsky. It would evolve into a living, breathing character in his developing consciousness, and, subsequently, in his literary works. Its labyrinthine streets, its cold, imposing architecture, its fog-laden atmosphere, and its diverse, often desperate populace would serve as the backdrop and the inspiration for many of his most iconic narratives. The city itself seemed to embody the complex, often contradictory nature of the human soul, a place of both lofty aspirations and profound despair, of dazzling light and oppressive shadow. His time there, initially marked by the strictures of military education, was simultaneously an immersion in a unique urban environment that would forever mark his artistic imagination. Despite the pragmatic demands of the Military Engineering Academy, Dostoevsky's true intellectual energies were directed elsewhere. The curriculum of mathematics, fortifications, and strategic planning held little appeal for his introspective and imaginative mind. Instead, the academy years became a period of intense, self-directed literary immersion. He found solace and stimulation within the pages of books, often neglecting his official studies for the rich worlds offered by European literature. His reading during this time was vast and eclectic, laying the groundwork for his future literary endeavours. French authors, in particular, captivated his attention. Honoré de Balzac, with his sprawling human comedy, and incisive psychological portraits of societal decay profoundly influenced Dostoevsky's understanding of urban life and the complexities of human motivation. Victor Hugo's grand narratives of social injustice and moral struggle, infused with a passionate romanticism, resonated deeply with Dostoevsky's developing empathy for the suffering. These writers offered not merely stories, but expansive visions of humanity grappling with its circumstances. German Romanticism also left an indelible mark. Friedrich Schiller's dramatic works, with their exploration of freedom, dignity, and the conflict between idealism and reality, spoke directly to Dostoevsky's youthful aspirations and his burgeoning sense of moral purpose. The grand themes of good and evil, sacrifice, and redemption, so central to Schiller, would later find powerful echoes in Dostoevsky's own fiction. He absorbed these influences not as a passive reader, but as an aspiring artist, dissecting their narrative techniques, character development, and philosophical underpinnings. This extensive engagement with the masters of European literature was crucial in shaping Dostoevsky's nascent literary voice. It provided him with a rich palette of narrative styles and thematic concerns. He learned to observe the human condition with a keen, analytical eye, to delve into the psychological depths of his characters, and to imbue his stories with a powerful moral and philosophical dimension. These academy years, though outwardly focused on engineering, were in truth a profound apprenticeship in the art of storytelling, a silent preparation for the literary path he was destined to follow. The world of books became his true classroom, and the great European authors his most influential teachers. As Dostoevsky delved deeper into the literary worlds of Balzac, Hugo, and Schiller, a quiet but firm conviction began to take root within him. The path of military engineering, initially chosen out of familial expectation and practical necessity, increasingly felt like a detour, a misdirection from his true calling. The meticulous drawings, the calculations, the regimented structure of the academy seemed antithetical to the expansive, often chaotic inner landscape he was cultivating through his reading. He perceived his destiny not in the construction of fortresses or the planning of campaigns, but in the crafting of narratives, in the exploration of the human soul. This growing certainty was not born of youthful recklessness, but of a deep, internal resonance. He recognized in literature a profound capacity to articulate the complex emotions, the moral dilemmas, and the social injustices that had stirred within him since childhood. The suffering he had witnessed, the personal traumas he had endured, and the stark contrasts of St. Petersburg life all seemed to demand expression through the written word. It became clear that his purpose was to observe, to reflect, and ultimately to create. His early literary aspirations manifested in various forms. While no major original works from this precise period survive, he engaged in the painstaking process of translation, a crucial exercise for any budding writer. Translating the works of others allowed him to intimately study their style, their rhythm, and their mastery of language. It was a rigorous apprenticeship, a way to internalize the mechanics of storytelling and to refine his own command of Russian prose. This quiet, dedicated effort, often undertaken in the solitude of his small room, revealed a nascent but unwavering determination. Dostoevsky's resolve was not always outwardly expressed. It was an internal furnace, steadily burning. He spoke of his literary ambitions with his brother Mikhail, a confidant who shared his intellectual interests. These conversations, often late into the night, provided a vital outlet for his creative energy and affirmed his growing belief that literature was not merely a pastime but a profession, a sacred duty. The world of engineering was slowly receding, making way for the world of words, a realm where Dostoevsky felt an undeniable sense of belonging and purpose. In 1843, Fyodor Dostoevsky completed his studies at the main engineering academy, receiving his commission as an ensign. This achievement marked the culmination of years of rigorous, if often unenthusiastic, academic effort. He'd fulfilled the expectations placed upon him, particularly those that had stemmed from his late father's pragmatic desires. However, the sense of accomplishment was likely muted, overshadowed by the persistent inner pull towards a different life. His brief career in the engineering corps commenced shortly thereafter. It was a period characterized by a profound lack of enthusiasm. The daily duties, the technical specifics, the bureaucratic routine of military service offered little to engage his burgeoning literary mind. The structures he was now tasked with understanding and maintaining were physical. His own interests lay in the intricate, often invisible architecture of human thought and emotion. The contrast between his external obligations and his internal aspirations became increasingly stark. This disjunction could not long endure. The call of literature, which had quietly resonated throughout his academy years, now became an insistent demand. Dostoevsky found himself spending more time reading and writing in his off hours than attending to his official duties with any real zeal. The thought of a lifelong career within the engineering corps, with its predictable trajectory and limited scope for imaginative exploration, became increasingly unbearable. Therefore, in 1844, after barely a year of service, Dostoevsky made a momentous decision. He tendered his resignation from the engineering corps. This act was a significant turning point, a definitive break from the path that had been laid out for him. It was a declaration of independence, a commitment to an uncertain future solely dedicated to the pursuit of writing. He chose the precarious, often financially challenging life of an author over the stability and security of a military career. This decision, made with quiet conviction, marked the true beginning of his journey as a literary artist, a journey that would profoundly shape not only his own life, but also the course of Russian and world literature. Having shed the uniform of an engineer, Dostoevsky plunged into the uncertain existence of an aspiring writer in St. Petersburg. The financial stability, however modest, that military service had offered, evaporated almost immediately. His decision to dedicate himself entirely to literature meant embracing a life of pervasive financial difficulty, a struggle that would, in various forms, shadow him for many years. He found himself frequently in need of funds, relying on small loans from friends, family, and sometimes even acquaintances. These were often barely enough to cover his immediate expenses, creating a constant low-level anxiety that permeated his daily life. The concept of a steady income was a distant dream, replaced by the unpredictable and often meagre earnings from literary attempts. This precarious financial state was a stark reality for many young intellectuals and artists in mid-19th century Russia, particularly those without independent means. St. Petersburg, with its grand facades and hidden courtyards, became the backdrop for this struggle. Dostoevsky moved between various rented rooms, often modest and sometimes cramped, reflecting his fluctuating fortunes. These temporary lodgings, though frequently situated in the less fashionable districts, provided him with a unique vantage point. From these windows and through his walks along the city's canals and bustling streets, he observed the diverse inhabitants of the imperial capital. He saw the faces of the poor, the clerks, the students, the dreamers, and the desperate. He absorbed the atmosphere of the city's taverns and tenements, its grand avenues and its squalid corners. This direct, often unflinching observation of urban life, particularly its darker and more vulnerable aspects, became an invaluable education. It deepened his understanding of human nature under duress, and provided a rich wellspring of characters and settings for his future works. His daily life during this period was a testament to his unwavering commitment to his chosen path, despite the hardships. He spent countless hours reading, writing, and refining his craft, often fueled by strong tea and a fierce determination. The material deprivation he experienced was, in a profound and perhaps unintended way, shaping his artistic vision, drawing him closer to the very subjects and themes that would later define his literary genius: poverty, suffering, moral dilemmas, and the complex inner lives of ordinary people. This period of early struggle was not merely a phase of hardship, but a crucible in which his unique artistic sensibility was forged. Amidst the financial uncertainties and the quiet observations of St. Petersburg life, Fyodor Dostoevsky diligently worked on his first novel. This effort culminated in the publication of Poor Folk in 1846, a work that would unexpectedly launch him into the literary circles of the time. It was a novel that, while modest in scope, carried a significant emotional weight and introduced themes that would resonate throughout his later, more complex masterpieces. Poor Folk adopted an epistolary form, meaning it was composed entirely of letters exchanged between its two main characters, Makar Devushkin, an aging, impoverished government clerk, and Varvara Dobroselova, a young, distant relative to whom he offers what little support he can. Through their correspondence, the reader gains intimate access to their daily struggles, their small joys, and their profound sense of dignity amidst overwhelming poverty. This format allowed Dostoevsky to explore the inner lives of his characters with a directness and intimacy that was both innovative and deeply moving. The novel's central focus rested squarely on the lives of ordinary, often forgotten individuals. It painted a detailed and sympathetic portrait of those existing on the margins of society, grappling with the relentless pressures of destitution in the bustling, indifferent city. Dostoevsky meticulously rendered their cramped living conditions, their meagre meals, and their constant anxieties over rent and basic necessities. Yet, amidst this struggle, he illuminated their enduring humanity, their capacity for kindness, and their yearning for respect. The tone of Poor Folk was notably quiet and deeply sympathetic. There was no grand pronouncement or dramatic societal critique, but rather a gentle yet persistent plea for understanding. Dostoevsky invited readers to step into the shoes of Devushkin and Varvara, to feel their quiet desperation and to acknowledge their inherent worth. The narrative unfolded with a tender melancholy, highlighting the small acts of generosity and the profound emotional bonds that could sustain individuals even in the face of profound hardship. It was a work that sought to dignify the lives of the downtrodden, revealing the rich inner world often concealed by outward appearances of poverty and insignificance. The quiet publication of Poor Folk didn't remain quiet for long. Its nuanced portrayal of human suffering and dignity quickly captured the attention of St. Petersburg's literary circles. The novel's understated power resonated deeply with readers and, crucially, with the most influential literary critic of the age, Vissarion Belinsky. His enthusiastic reception of the work would prove to be a pivotal moment in Dostoevsky's nascent career. Belinsky, known for his sharp intellect and his uncompromising standards, was profoundly moved by Poor Folk. He recognized in Dostoevsky a new and significant voice, one that brought a fresh perspective to the depiction of Russian society. Belinsky famously declared Dostoevsky a new Gogol, a comparison that immediately elevated the young writer's standing and brought him into the very forefront of contemporary literature. This was not merely a compliment, it was an anointing, a public declaration of Dostoevsky's genius by the most respected literary arbiter of his time. For Dostoevsky, this immediate critical success brought a profound sense of validation. After years of quiet struggle and self-doubt, the recognition from someone of Belinsky's stature was an immense affirmation of his chosen path. It confirmed his belief in his own artistic vision and the power of his voice. He had poured his observations and empathy into poor folk, and now it was being acknowledged and celebrated in a way he could scarcely have imagined. Yet, alongside this quiet excitement, there came an undeniable pressure. The weight of Belinsky's praise, while exhilarating, also set a formidable expectation. To be hailed as a new Gogol meant that all subsequent works would be measured against this high standard. The literary world now watched Dostoevsky with keen interest, anticipating his next move. This sudden elevation from an unknown aspiring writer to a celebrated literary figure created both opportunity and a subtle yet persistent burden of expectation that would accompany him in the years to come. With the resounding success of Poor Folk and Belinsky's powerful endorsement, Fyodor Dostoevsky found himself swiftly drawn into the vibrant literary circles of St. Petersburg. He was no longer an obscure, struggling writer. He was now a figure of interest, an emerging talent whose voice had been officially recognized. This period marked his introduction to a world teeming with intellect and artistic ambition, a world he had long observed from a distance. He began to associate with prominent literary figures, including Nikolai Nekrasov, a poet and publisher who had played a crucial role in bringing Poor Folk to Belinsky's attention, and Ivan Turgenev, a novelist already establishing himself as a significant voice in Russian letters. These were the luminaries of the time, individuals whose conversations shaped the literary landscape and whose opinions held considerable sway. Dostoevsky, still relatively young and new to such company, absorbed the atmosphere, the debates, and the shared passion for literature. Initially, there was a sense of camaraderie, a shared excitement for the new talent that Dostoevsky represented. He was welcomed into gatherings where ideas were exchanged, and the future of Russian literature was discussed with fervour. The label of the new Gogol, bestowed by Belinsky, preceded him, creating an aura of anticipation wherever he went. This designation was both a great honour and a heavy mantle. It meant that he was not only expected to produce more works of the same calibre as Poor Folk, but also to potentially surpass them, to evolve and solidify his place as a leading figure. The expectations were immense. Every subsequent word he wrote, every story he conceived, would be scrutinized through the lens of that initial, breathtaking success. The literary world, having embraced him so warmly, now waited to see if he could fulfill the promise of his debut. This period, therefore, was marked by a delicate balance, the joy of acceptance and recognition, intertwined with the formidable pressure of sustaining a level of genius that had been so grandly proclaimed. The quiet young man from a modest background was now under the spotlight, and the demands of this new reality were beginning to settle upon him. Following the initial acclaim for Poor Folk, Dostoevsky sought to build upon his nascent literary career, though his subsequent endeavours did not replicate the same immediate success. In 1846, he published The Double, a novella that delved into the psychological disintegration of a civil servant, Yakov Petrovich Golyatkin, who encounters a doppelganger of himself. This new work was ambitious, exploring themes of identity, madness, and social alienation with a depth that was arguably ahead of its time. However, the reception was markedly different from that of Poor Folk. While Poor Folk had been praised for its compassionate realism and direct emotional appeal, The Double was met with confusion and, in many quarters, outright disappointment. Critics, including Belinsky, found its style convoluted and its subject matter unsettling. The intricate psychological landscape, which would later be recognized as a hallmark of Dostoevsky's genius, was then perceived as muddled and excessive. The public, too, found it difficult to engage with the narrative, which lacked the clear, empathetic characters that had resonated so deeply in his debut. This lukewarm, often negative, critical reaction was a significant blow to Dostoevsky. The high expectations placed upon him as the new Gogol now seemed to mock his efforts. The pressure to produce another masterpiece, coupled with the critical rebukes, led to a period of profound personal frustration. He continued to write, beginning the novel Netochka Nezvanova in 1849, an unfinished work that explored the life of a young girl navigating a complex and often harsh world. Yet, this too failed to recapture the earlier enthusiasm. Dostoevsky found himself in a quiet struggle, a period of introspection and artistic re-evaluation. He was grappling with the challenge of finding his unique voice, or one that could fully articulate the complex inner lives and moral dilemmas that so preoccupied him, without alienating his audience or his critics. The initial ease of his ascent had given way to the arduous task of artistic self-definition. This phase of critical disappointment, while painful, was an essential crucible for the writer, compelling him to refine his craft and deepen his understanding of the human psyche, away from the immediate gratification of universal acclaim. In the midst of his artistic struggles and personal frustrations, Fyodor Dostoevsky found himself drawn to intellectual circles that offered a different kind of stimulation. One such gathering was the Petrashevsky Circle, a group that convened regularly in St. Petersburg during the late 1840s. Founded by Mikhail Petrashevsky, a follower of the French utopian socialist Charles Fourier, these meetings brought together a diverse collection of writers, officers, and government officials. Their primary purpose was the quiet discussion of social and political reforms, a practice that, while seemingly innocuous to modern sensibilities, held a particular weight in the autocratic climate of Imperial Russia. The members of the Petrashevsky Circle were united by a shared intellectual curiosity and a desire for societal improvement. They engaged in thoughtful debates about the pressing issues of their time, including serfdom, censorship, and the need for legal and administrative reforms. Their discussions were often influenced by the burgeoning ideas of European utopian socialism, which posited ideal societies based on cooperation, equality, and the rational organization of labour. These theories, particularly those of Fourier, offered visions of a more just and harmonious world, contrasting sharply with the realities of 19th century Russia. Dostoevsky's involvement with the Petrashevsky Circle was rooted in this intellectual seeking. He was not a revolutionary firebrand, nor did he actively advocate for the violent overthrow of the existing order. Instead, his participation reflected a deep-seated concern for the welfare of the common people, a sentiment that had already permeated his literary works. He was drawn to the Circle's discussions as a means of exploring ideas that might alleviate suffering and injustice. He listened, he debated, and he absorbed the varied perspectives presented by his fellow intellectuals. His interest lay more in the philosophical and ethical implications of these reformist ideas than in their practical revolutionary application. Dostoevsky was a man of profound introspection, and the Petrashevsky Circle provided an environment where he could quietly engage with challenging concepts, testing their merits against his own evolving worldview. It was a space for intellectual exploration and quiet dissent, a collective search for answers to Russia's profound social questions, rather than a hotbed of radical conspiracy. This period of his life thus marked a broadening of his intellectual horizons, exposing him to currents of thought that would later find echoes, both direct and indirect, in his mature literary output. The quiet intellectual discussions of the Petrashevsky Circle, though not overtly revolutionary, occurred against a backdrop of increasing government paranoia in Imperial Russia. The reign of Emperor Nicholas I was marked by a deep-seated fear of liberal ideas and any form of perceived dissent. The European revolutions of 1848 only intensified this apprehension, leading to a tightening grip on public discourse and a heightened sense of vigilance against any groups deemed subversive. The third section, the Emperor's Secret Police, maintained extensive surveillance networks, quietly monitoring individuals and organizations suspected of harboring radical thoughts. Even seemingly innocuous gatherings, where ideas of social reform were merely debated rather than acted upon, became targets of suspicion. The state viewed the very act of independent intellectual assembly as a potential threat to its absolute authority. We informers infiltrated various circles, reporting back to the authorities on the content of conversations and the sentiments expressed by participants. The Petrashevsky Circle, with its open discussions of utopian socialism and critiques of the existing order, inevitably attracted the attention of these watchful eyes. The inevitable consequence of this surveillance arrived with chilling suddenness. In the early morning hours of April 23, 1849, while Dostoevsky was asleep in his apartment, agents of the third section descended. There was no warning, no dramatic confrontation, merely the quiet, efficient execution of an imperial decree. Dostoevsky, along with many other members of the Petrashevsky Circle, was roused from his sleep and placed under arrest. The precise details of the arrests were designed to maximize shock and minimize resistance, ensuring that the individuals were seized before they could react or communicate with one another. This abrupt cessation of his freedom marked a profound turning point in Dostoevsky's life. One moment, he was a struggling author, grappling with literary criticism and intellectual concepts. The next, he was a prisoner of the state, his future entirely uncertain. The quiet discussions, the hopes for reform, and his early literary aspirations were all suddenly overshadowed by the grim reality of imprisonment. His nascent career, which had begun with such promise, was now abruptly interrupted, casting a long shadow over his path forward. Following his arrest, Fyodor Dostoevsky was incarcerated in the Peter and Paul Fortress, a formidable structure situated on an island in the Neva River. This ancient citadel, originally built by Peter the Great, served not only as a military fortification, but also as a political prison, its thick walls and isolated cells designed to enforce absolute solitude. Dostoevsky was placed in a solitary cell within the Alexievsky Ravelin, a section specifically reserved for high-profile political prisoners. The conditions of his confinement were stark and designed to exert psychological pressure. The small Spartan cell offered little comfort or distraction. The days passed in a monotonous rhythm, marked only by the delivery of meagre rations and the occasional visit from a guard. This profound isolation was one of the most potent tools employed by the authorities. Cut off from all contact with the outside world, without news of family or friends, Dostoevsky was left entirely to his own thoughts. The absence of external stimuli amplified his internal reflections, creating an environment where the mind could wander into both profound contemplation and gnawing anxiety. During his time in the fortress, Dostoevsky underwent a series of interrogations. These were not typically brutal physical encounters, but rather drawn-out, probing sessions conducted by the investigative commission. The interrogators sought to uncover the full extent of the Petrashevsky Circle's activities, their aims, and the specific roles of each member. Dostoevsky, like his fellow prisoners, was questioned repeatedly about his involvement, his political beliefs, and his knowledge of any revolutionary intentions. He maintained that the Circle's discussions were purely theoretical, without any practical designs for overthrowing the government. The psychological toll of this period was immense. The uncertainty of his fate weighed heavily upon him. Each day brought renewed apprehension as the future remained an opaque and menacing void. He did not know if he would be imprisoned indefinitely, exiled to Siberia, or face an even harsher punishment. This prolonged state of not knowing, combined with the enforced solitude, tested his resilience profoundly. Despite the profound stress, Dostoevsky found solace in a copy of the New Testament, the only book permitted to him, which he read repeatedly, beginning a deeper engagement with religious themes that would later permeate his most significant works. The Peter and Paul fortress became a crucible, shaping his understanding of human endurance under extreme duress. On the morning of December 22nd, 1849, a chilling and deliberate spectacle unfolded in Semyonovsky Square, an event that would indelibly mark Fyodor Dostoevsky. The Petrashevsky prisoners, including Dostoevsky, were abruptly awakened and informed of their death sentences. They were then transported to the square, where a scaffold had been erected, surrounded by a large contingent of troops and a silent, sombre crowd. The condemned men, dressed in long white shirts, the traditional attire for those facing execution, were led onto the platform. Their hands were bound, and they were forced to kneel. A priest, holding a crucifix, offered them the last rites, a final opportunity for confession and spiritual absolution before what appeared to be their imminent demise. Dostoevsky exchanged a final, profound glance with his fellow prisoners, believing these to be his last moments on earth. He later recounted vivid details of this experience, particularly the overwhelming sense of the preciousness of life in the face of its absolute conclusion. The sky, the faces around him, every detail became extraordinarily sharp and significant. 3 prisoners, including Petrashevsky himself, were selected first. They were tied to stakes, and black hoods were placed over their heads. The firing squad stood ready, their rifles aimed. A drumroll began, signalling the final seconds. Dostoevsky stood among the remaining prisoners, watching, waiting for his own turn, convinced that death was moments away. He imagined the precise instant of impact, the sudden oblivion. In these fleeting seconds, his mind raced through his past, his aspirations, and the love he felt for life. Then, just as the command to fire was about to be given, a white handkerchief was waved, and the drum roll abruptly ceased. An officer rode forward, dramatically announcing that the Tsar had commuted their sentences. The death penalty was replaced with hard labour and exile to Siberia. It was a reprieve delivered at the very precipice of death, a meticulously orchestrated psychological torment designed to instill absolute fear and obedience. The profound psychological impact of this mock execution on Dostoevsky cannot be overstated. He had stared into the abyss, confronted his own mortality, and experienced the raw terror of absolute finality. This near-death experience became a crucible, burning away previous illusions and deepening his understanding of human existence, suffering, and the value of every single moment. It was a turning point, quietly reshaping his worldview and laying a foundation for the intense moral and existential themes that would define his later literary masterpieces. The memory of those final seconds, the feeling of life almost extinguished, remained with him, a constant, vivid reminder of life's precariousness and its immense, sacred worth. The reprieve granted in Semyonovsky Square did not signify freedom, but rather a different, perhaps more protracted form of suffering. The revised sentence for Fyodor Dostoevsky stipulated 4 years of katorga, or penal servitude, within a Siberian labour camp. This period of hard labour was to be followed by an indefinite term of compulsory military service as a private soldier, effectively exiling him from the intellectual and literary life he cherished. It was a sentence designed not merely as punishment, but as a complete rupture from his former existence, intended to break his spirit and extinguish any remaining rebellious thoughts. Following the mock execution, the prisoners were quickly prepared for their journey. Dostoevsky, along with others, was shackled and dressed in the coarse grey uniform of a convict. The long, arduous journey to Siberia commenced shortly thereafter, a silent westward passage into an unknown and unforgiving land. This was not a quick traverse. It was a slow, deliberate procession, stretching for weeks across the vast frozen plains of Russia. They travelled in open sleighs during the bitter Siberian winter, enduring extreme cold, inadequate food, and the constant psychological burden of their fate. The landscape outside blurred into an endless expanse of snow and ice, reflecting the bleakness of their internal world. Communication among the prisoners was often restricted, and the guards maintained a strict, unyielding silence, further emphasizing their isolation. Dostoevsky noted the gradual transformation of his surroundings, from the familiar cities to the desolate remote outposts that mark the path to Omsk, the specific location of his assigned prison camp. This journey itself was an initiation into a new harsh reality. Each mile covered separated him further from St. Petersburg, from his brother, from his literary aspirations, and from the life he'd known. It was a physical and spiritual descent into the depths of a penal system designed to strip individuals of their identity and dignity. As they drew closer to Omsk, the realization of the suffering that awaited them became more palpable. Then the silent passage was a transition, not merely geographical, but existential, marking the end of one chapter of Dostoevsky's life and the sombre beginning of another, far more challenging one. The gates of the Omsk Katorga prison awaited, ready to enclose him within its walls for the next 4 years. Upon arrival at the Omsk Katorga prison, Fyodor Dostoevsky entered a world of profound deprivation and enforced dehumanization. For 4 long years, from 1850 to 1854, he lived under conditions that tested the very limits of human endurance. The prison itself was a dilapidated wooden fortress, perpetually overcrowded and unsanitary. Disease was rampant, and the air was thick with the stench of human waste and unwashed bodies. The daily routine was brutal and monotonous. Convicts were subjected to hard labour, often meaningless and physically taxing regardless of their background or previous social standing. Dostoevsky, a former nobleman and intellectual, found himself performing tasks alongside common criminals, many of whom were murderers and thieves. The work included breaking plaster, shoveling snow, and other menial chores, often performed in extreme weather conditions. The food was meagre and barely palatable, consisting mainly of black bread and thin cabbage soup. One of the most insidious aspects of his confinement was the enforced silence. Intellectual conversation was forbidden, and even casual chatter was often met with punishment. This created an atmosphere of profound isolation, despite being constantly surrounded by hundreds of other men. For a man whose life revolved around words and ideas, this suppression of expression was particularly agonizing. He was stripped of his social identity. His noble birth and literary achievements meant nothing within the prison walls. He was simply another convict, identified by his number and the clanking of his shackles. Dostoevsky slept in crowded barracks, sharing a narrow bunk with other prisoners. The camaraderie that might have offered some solace was often absent, replaced by suspicion, resentment, and the ever-present threat of violence from both fellow convicts and brutal guards. He observed the stark realities of human nature under duress, the flashes of unexpected kindness, the depths of depravity, the desperate clinging to hope, and the slow erosion of dignity. He was forced to confront the raw, unvarnished aspects of humanity, stripped of societal conventions and polite veneers. This constant exposure to hardened criminals, to men who had committed heinous acts, offered Dostoevsky an unparalleled, if agonizing, education in the darker recesses of the human psyche. He saw firsthand the complexity of guilt and innocence, the motivations behind crime, and the resilience of the human spirit even in the most abject circumstances. These observations, though born of suffering, would later become the bedrock of his most profound literary explorations. Amidst the desolation of the Omsk Katorga, a profound internal process began to unfold within Fyodor Dostoevsky. Stripped of his former intellectual life, with all books but one forbidden, he turned to the New Testament, which had been given to him by Natalia von Vizina, a Decembrist's wife, on his way to Siberia. This single book became his constant companion, its pages worn from repeated reading. This was not merely a return to childhood piety, but a deep, almost involuntary engagement with the core tenets of Christian faith. The narratives of suffering, sacrifice, and redemption within the Gospels resonated with his own lived experience of extreme hardship. He found in them a language to articulate the inexplicable pain and the persistent flicker of hope he witnessed in his fellow convicts. His interactions with the common people, the peasants and criminals who formed the vast majority of the prison population, also proved transformative. Before prison, Dostoevsky, like many intellectuals of his time, had viewed the Russian peasantry through an idealized or theoretical lens. In Katorga, he encountered them as individuals, with all their flaws and virtues, and their raw faith and their deep-seated superstitions. He observed their resilience, their capacity for both cruelty and compassion, and their often unspoken connection to spiritual traditions. This direct, unmediated exposure to the narod, the Russian people, shattered many of his preconceived notions. He began to develop a deep respect for their inherent wisdom and their spiritual fortitude, a respect that would become a cornerstone of his later philosophical and political thought. He started to believe that true spiritual insight and moral strength resided not in the educated elite, but in the simple faith of the common man. The concept of redemptive suffering, a theme that would permeate his great novels, quietly began to take root during these years. He saw how suffering, though agonizing, could also be a path to deeper understanding, to purification, and to a more profound connection with God. This was a slow, arduous process, not a sudden revelation, but a gradual shift in his inner landscape, forged in the crucible of deprivation and spiritual introspection. The seeds of his mature worldview centered on faith, the Russian soul, and the complex relationship between suffering and redemption were sown in the silent confines of the Omsk Katorga. In January of 1854, the gates of the Omsk Katorga at last opened for Fyodor Dostoevsky. 4 years of hard labour, of physical torment and psychological isolation had come to their appointed end. Yet this release was not a return to freedom in its fullest sense. The second part of his sentence, military service as a private, now awaited him. He was dispatched to Semipalatinsk, a remote town in what is now Kazakhstan, to join the 7th Siberian Line Battalion. This transition marked a shift from the explicit brutality of penal servitude to a more subtle, yet still profound form of confinement. While no longer subjected to chains or the constant threat of the lash, Dostoevsky found himself immersed in the rigid hierarchy and mundane routines of army life. The intellectual void of Katorga was replaced by the stultifying tedium of military drills and provincial garrison existence. His status as a former political prisoner meant he was under constant surveillance, his every action scrutinized. The hope of resuming his literary career, which had sustained him through the darkest days of hard labour, remained a distant prospect. Writing was still largely forbidden, and the intellectual stimulation so vital to his creative spirit was almost entirely absent. Life in Semipalatinsk offered few comforts. He lived in barracks, sharing close quarters with soldiers, many of whom were uneducated and unsophisticated. The stark contrast with the literary salons of St. Petersburg could not have been greater. Yet, even within this new form of exile, Dostoevsky sought to adapt, to observe, and to endure. He was a private subject to the commands of officers, forced to perform the most basic military duties. This period represented another layer of humbling experience, a further stripping away of his former identity as a celebrated writer. It was a prolonged period of waiting, of quiet observation, and of continued internal processing of his Siberian ordeal. The external circumstances had changed, but the fundamental struggle for intellectual and spiritual sustenance persisted. The vast empty steppes surrounding Semipalatinsk mirrored, in a way, the internal landscape he was still navigating, slowly piecing together the fragments of his shattered life. During his period of military service in Semipalatinsk, Fyodor Dostoevsky encountered Maria Dmitrievna Isaeva. She was a woman of fragile health and spirited temperament, a widow with a young son, Pavel, from her previous marriage. Her husband, a local official, had recently passed away, leaving her in a precarious financial situation. Dostoevsky, still navigating the personal emptiness of his exile, found himself drawn to her, perhaps by a shared sense of vulnerability and isolation in the remote Siberian town. Their relationship, from its very inception, was marked by complexity and emotional turbulence. Maria Dmitrievna was not without other suitors, and Dostoevsky faced competition for her affections. This period was characterized by intense emotional swings, moments of profound connection, interspersed with jealousy, doubt, and misunderstanding. Letters from this time reveal Dostoevsky's fervent passion, yet also his deep anxieties about her fidelity and the uncertain nature of their future. His financial instability, a constant shadow over his life, further complicated matters. As a private, his earnings were meagre, and the prospect of supporting a family seemed daunting. Despite these obstacles, and perhaps because of the very intensity of the emotional landscape they shared, Dostoevsky's resolve to marry Maria deepened. He saw in her a potential anchor, or companion to share the lonely expanse of his continued exile. After a courtship fraught with emotional difficulty, Fyodor Dostoevsky and Maria Dmitrievna Isaeva were eventually married in February of 1857. The ceremony took place in the small church of Semipalatinsk. Their union, however, did not bring an immediate calm to their lives. Maria Dmitrievna's delicate health continued to be a source of concern, and her temperament, at times volatile, often clashed with Dostoevsky's own intense and introspective nature. Their marriage, though a significant personal milestone for Dostoevsky, was not one of a serene domesticity. It was a partnership forged in hardship, tested by poverty, illness, and the lingering psychological shadows of Dostoevsky's penal past. It became another crucible in his life, a quiet, intimate struggle playing out against the vast, indifferent backdrop of Siberian exile. This personal complexity would, in time, find echoes in the intricate relationships he would later depict in his literary works. Following his release from hard labour and during his subsequent military service, a quiet longing for his former literary life began to stir within Dostoevsky. The enforced intellectual silence of the prison had been a torment, and the idleness of military life, though less overtly brutal, still chafed at his creative spirit. Slowly, cautiously, he began to make tentative attempts to re-engage with his craft. This was not an easy process. The conditions for writing were far from ideal. He was still under surveillance, and his freedom of expression remained curtailed. The rustic environment of Semipalatinsk offered little in the way of intellectual stimulation or literary companionship. Furthermore, the daily routines of military service, even if not physically demanding, occupied his time and energy. His personal life, particularly his complex relationship with Maria Dmitrievna, also consumed much of his emotional reserve. Despite these challenges, the irresistible urge to create slowly reasserted itself. Dostoevsky began to jot down ideas, outlines, and fragments of stories. His early efforts were often clandestine, a private rebellion against the restrictions placed upon him. He corresponded with his brother Mikhail, expressing his renewed desire to write and seeking advice on potential projects. These letters reveal a careful weighing of what might be permissible under the watchful eyes of the authorities, and what might be too provocative. One of the first significant works to emerge from this period was The Village of Stepanchikovo and Its Inhabitants, a novella he began drafting around 1857. It marked a return to fiction, albeit in a somewhat lighter, more satirical vein than his later darker masterpieces. This choice of subject matter may have been a deliberate strategy, an attempt to test the waters of literary production without drawing undue attention or censure. His re-entry into the world of letters was a gradual and arduous process, marked by both creative frustration and a persistent, underlying hope. It was a slow rekindling of a flame that had been almost extinguished, a testament to the enduring power of his artistic vocation, even in the most adverse circumstances. These cautious beginnings laid the groundwork for his eventual triumphant return to the Russian literary scene, but for now, they were quiet acts of defiance, small steps toward reclaiming his true self. After a decade spent in the vast, isolating expanses of Siberia, the imperial pardon finally arrived for Fyodor Dostoevsky, bringing with it the long-awaited permission to return to European Russia. This was a moment of profound, quiet relief. In December 1859, he began the long journey westward, accompanied by his wife Maria Dmitrievna and her young son Pavel. Their initial destination was Tver, a city situated between Moscow and St. Petersburg. The terms of his pardon still prohibited him from residing in the capital cities immediately. This interim period in Tver was a transitional phase, a gentle re-entry into a society he had not truly known for 10 years. He found the pace of life in Tver to be calmer than the bustling capitals, allowing him a measured adjustment to his new freedom. Finally, in the autumn of 1860, the ultimate permission was granted, allowing Dostoevsky to return to St. Petersburg, the city that had witnessed his early literary triumphs and his devastating arrest. The return to the familiar, yet now profoundly altered streets of the imperial capital must have been a deeply affecting experience. He was no longer the young, ambitious writer who had left in chains. The intervening years had etched themselves onto his very being, transforming his perspectives and deepening his understanding of human nature. The St. Petersburg he encountered was a city in flux, reflecting a Russia on the cusp of significant change. The liberal reforms of Alexander II were beginning to take hold, fostering new ideas and a different intellectual climate. The Crimean War had ended, revealing the empire's internal weaknesses and sparking a period of introspection and modernization. Serfdom, a cornerstone of Russian society for centuries, was on the brink of abolition. Dostoevsky observed these changes with a keen, analytical eye. The society he now re-entered was more complex, more questioning, and perhaps more volatile than the one he had departed. The idealism of his youth had been tempered by suffering, and he now viewed the world with a more nuanced, often darker, understanding. It was as this period of observation and reassimilation would prove crucial for his subsequent literary endeavours, providing rich material for the profound psychological dramas that were yet to come. His return was not merely a physical journey, but a profound re-engagement with the pulse of a changing nation. Upon his return to St. Petersburg, Dostoevsky embarked on a work that would profoundly reshape his literary standing, and offer the Russian public an unprecedented glimpse into the realities of penal servitude. This was Notes from the House of the Dead, serialized between 1860 and 1862. The work, while semi-autobiographical in nature, was presented as the memoirs of a fictional character, Alexander Petrovich Goryanchikov, a nobleman sentenced to 10 years of katorga in Siberia for murdering his wife. This narrative device allowed Dostoevsky a degree of artistic freedom and protection, distancing the raw personal experience while retaining its authentic essence. Notes from the House of the Dead was not a work of polemic or sensationalism. Instead, it offered a calm, observational, and deeply detailed portrayal of life within a Siberian prison camp. Dostoevsky meticulously described the daily routines, the harsh physical labor, the meager rations, and the brutal discipline. He explored the complex social dynamics among the prisoners, a diverse group ranging from hardened criminals to political exiles, highlighting their individual quirks, their moments of unexpected humanity, and their profound degradation. The impact of this work was immediate and substantial. Prior to its publication, detailed, then first-hand accounts of the Russian katorga system were exceedingly rare. For the vast majority of the Russian public, the realities of penal servitude remained shrouded in mystery and official silence. Dostoevsky's narrative pulled back this veil, exposing the dehumanizing conditions and the psychological toll of imprisonment. Yet he did so without excessive sentimentality or overt political commentary, allowing the stark facts and the quiet dignity of certain inmates to speak for themselves. The book resonated deeply across society, from the highest echelons of government to the burgeoning intellectual circles. It was lauded by critics and widely read by the public, establishing Dostoevsky not only as a masterful writer, but also as an authoritative voice on a previously hidden aspect of Russian life. Notes from the House of the Dead became a foundational text in understanding the penal system of the Russian Empire, and remains a powerful testament to the resilience and fragility of the human spirit under extreme duress. Its calm, unblinking gaze at suffering cemented Dostoevsky's reputation as a writer unafraid to confront the darkest corners of human experience. Following the success of Notes from the House of the Dead, Fyodor Dostoevsky embarked upon a new and significant phase of his career, venturing into the demanding world of journalism and publishing. This endeavour was a collaborative effort with his elder brother Mikhail, and together they co-founded two literary journals, Vremya, meaning time, which ran from 1861 to 1863, and subsequently Epocha, or Epoch, from 1864 to 1865. These journals became platforms for Dostoevsky to articulate his evolving philosophical and social views, moving beyond mere fiction writing into broader cultural commentary. The intellectual foundation of these journals was a philosophy that Dostoevsky, along with Mikhail and other contributors, termed pochvenichestvo, often translated as native soil. This ideology represented a quiet yet determined attempt to reconcile the seemingly disparate intellectual currents of 19th century Russia. It sought a middle ground between the Westernizers, who advocated for Russia's adoption of European liberal values and institutions, and the Slavophiles, who championed Russia's unique spiritual and cultural heritage, often viewing Western influence with suspicion. Pochvenichestvo proposed that Russia's true path lay in understanding and developing its own unique identity, rooted in the spiritual values and traditions of its common people, the native soil. It suggested that true progress for Russia would come not from blind imitation of the West, nor from an isolationist rejection of all things foreign, but from an organic fusion of the best elements of European culture with the deep-seated spiritual and communal instincts of the Russian populace. This philosophy emphasized the importance of national unity, transcending class divisions, and a return to fundamental Christian values as the bedrock of Russian society. Through Vremya, and Epocha, Dostoevsky published his own works, including parts of Notes from the House of the Dead, and later Notes from Underground, alongside articles on literature, politics and social issues, all infused with this distinctive pochvennichestvo perspective. These journals became vital, if often financially precarious, vehicles for Dostoevsky to engage directly with the intellectual debates of his time, shaping public discourse and solidifying his position not just as a novelist, but as a significant cultural and philosophical voice. This period marked a crucial expansion of his influence beyond pure fiction, allowing him to directly address the pressing questions of Russia's identity and future. Despite the critical and public recognition that followed works like Notes from the House of the Dead and his significant efforts in journalism, Fyodor Dostoevsky found himself continually ensnared in a web of financial difficulties. A persistent background hum of anxiety accompanied much of his adult life, driven by an ever-present need for money. This was a struggle that never truly abated, colouring his daily existence and influencing his creative output in profound ways. One of the most significant contributors to his financial instability was a burgeoning gambling addiction, particularly to roulette. The allure of a quick fortune, a sudden release from the crushing weight of debt, proved to be an irresistible, yet ultimately destructive temptation. Periods of intense gambling binges would often follow periods of literary success, as Dostoevsky would use advances or earnings to fund his visits to the casinos of Europe, invariably leading to further losses and deeper despair. These experiences, though personally ruinous, would later become fertile ground for his literary explorations of human psychology, desperation, and the moral consequences of such compulsions, most notably in his novel The Gambler. Beyond the casino tables, Dostoevsky relied heavily on loans, often from acquaintances, publishers, or even less scrupulous lenders. These debts accumulated steadily, and the terms of repayment were frequently onerous, demanding a constant flow of new material to satisfy his creditors. Publishers, aware of his precarious financial state, often offered unfavourable contracts, requiring him to produce lengthy works within impossibly short deadlines, in exchange for much-needed advances. This created a relentless pressure, a perpetual race against the clock, to write not merely for artistic expression, but out of sheer economic necessity. The constant demand for money meant that Dostoevsky rarely had the luxury of leisurely composition. His creative process was often intertwined with the immediate need to put food on the table, to pay off a pressing debt, or to secure funds for his next move. This urgency sometimes led to hurried writing, to the simultaneous development of multiple projects, and to a continuous cycle of publication and debt. Even as his reputation as a master novelist grew, the shadow of financial insecurity remained, a quiet but persistent companion throughout his most productive years. This ongoing struggle provided a harsh counterpoint to his intellectual triumphs, reminding him, and implicitly his readers, of the material realities that often underpin even the most profound artistic endeavours. In the summer of 1862, Fyodor Dostoevsky embarked upon his first journey to Western Europe, a long-anticipated experience that would profoundly shape his philosophical and literary perspectives. This voyage was not merely a tourist's excursion, but a deep dive into societies that represented the antithesis of the Russian spiritual values he had come to embrace. He travelled through Germany, France, England, and Switzerland, observing the daily life and cultural currents with an intensely critical eye. His impressions were far from uniformly positive. Dostoevsky was particularly struck by what he perceived as the pervasive materialism and rationalism underpinning European society. In the bustling streets of London, for instance, he witnessed a stark contrast between opulent wealth and abject poverty, which he interpreted as a failure of Western ideals. The Crystal Palace, a symbol of industrial progress and human achievement, appeared to him not as a beacon of hope, but as a monument to human arrogance and a potentially dehumanizing future. He saw in its vastness a cold, calculating logic that diminished the individual spirit. Throughout his travels, Dostoevsky observed a relentless pursuit of economic gain and a scientific, almost mechanical approach to human existence. He felt a distinct absence of the spiritual depth and communal solidarity he believed were inherent to the Russian soul. This perception solidified his conviction that Western Europe, despite its technological advancements and intellectual movements, was on a path toward moral and spiritual decay. He found the individualistic ethos to be isolating, rather than liberating. These observations quietly yet powerfully reinforced his belief in Russia's unique destiny and its capacity to offer a different, more spiritually grounded path for humanity. His experiences abroad would later form the basis for Winter Notes on Summer Impressions, a work that satirized and critiqued European culture, laying the groundwork for many of the themes and ideological conflicts that would permeate his later major novels. The journey confirmed his growing conviction that Russia possessed a distinct spiritual identity, one that stood apart from, and perhaps even in opposition to, the prevailing trends of the West. In 1864, Fyodor Dostoevsky published Notes from Underground, a novella that stands as a pivotal moment in his literary development and a foundational text for existentialist thought. This work marked a profound departure from his earlier naturalistic style and ushered in a new era of radical psychological depth in his writing. It presented the world with a narrator unlike any seen before in literature, a nameless, bitter, and intensely self-aware former civil servant living in St. Petersburg, who delivers a rambling, contradictory, and deeply unsettling internal monologue. The novella is divided into two parts. The first, Underground, consists entirely of the narrator's philosophical ramblings, a torrent of self-lacerating confession and aggressive defiance. Here, Dostoevsky masterfully dissects the human psyche, exploring the darker, irrational impulses that lie beneath the veneer of civilization. The narrator rails against the prevailing rationalist philosophies of his time, particularly those that advocated for a perfectly ordered, scientifically managed society, often referred to as utopian rationalism. He argues vehemently against the idea that human beings are purely rational creatures who will always act in their own enlightened self-interest. Instead, he posits that humanity often cherishes the freedom to choose, even if that choice leads to suffering or self-destruction, simply to affirm its individuality. This quiet internal monologue broke new ground by exposing the inherent contradictions and absurdities within the human spirit. It challenged the optimistic belief in progress and the perfectibility of man, suggesting that there is a fundamental human desire for chaos and self-assertion that cannot be subdued by logic or grand societal schemes. The second part, apropos of the wet snow, illustrates these philosophical ideas through a series of humiliating and alienating encounters between the underground man and the outside world, showcasing his inability to connect authentically with others. Notes from Underground thus became a quiet yet forceful declaration of Dostoevsky's philosophical stance, anticipating many of the anxieties and intellectual struggles of the coming century. The year 1864 brought a series of profound personal tragedies that cast a long shadow over Fyodor Dostoevsky's life, deepening his already complex understanding of human suffering. In April of that year, his wife, Maria Dmitrievna Isaeva, passed away after a prolonged illness. Their marriage, though marked by periods of great difficulty and mutual misunderstanding, had nevertheless been a significant part of his adult life since his time in Siberia. Her death left him with a deep sense of loneliness and a heavy heart, a void that would be keenly felt in the quiet corners of his existence. The grief from Maria's passing was still fresh when just a few months later, in July 1864, another devastating loss struck. His elder brother, Mikhail Dostoevsky, succumbed unexpectedly to liver disease. This was a particularly crushing blow, as Mikhail had been a constant presence and a steady support throughout Fyodor's life. From their shared childhood dreams to their joint literary ventures, including the recent publication of Notes from Underground in their journal Epocha, Mikhail had been a partner, a confidant, and a pillar of strength. His death not only severed a profound personal bond, but also left Fyodor with a crippling financial burden. Mikhail had been the primary business manager for their literary journals, and his sudden demise left Fyodor solely responsible for a mountain of debt that had accumulated from their publishing endeavours. The journals themselves, already struggling, could not long survive without Mikhail's steady hand. Fyodor was now faced with the immense task of settling his brother's outstanding obligations, caring for Mikhail's family, and managing the affairs of the collapsing journal, all while grappling with his own overwhelming sorrow. These consecutive losses left Dostoevsky feeling profoundly isolated, adrift in a sea of grief and desperate financial strain. The weight of these events pressed heavily upon him, forcing him to confront the stark realities of mortality and the precariousness of human existence in a deeply personal way, further shaping the themes that would permeate his subsequent masterpieces. The immense sorrow and financial destitution that followed the deaths of Maria and Mikhail Dostoevsky created an urgent and relentless pressure on Fyodor. Buried under a mountain of debt, with the added responsibility of his late brother's family, he was compelled to write with an intensity and speed that would define this period of his life. It was out of this crucible of personal and economic desperation that one of his most celebrated novels, Crime and Punishment, began to take shape. The genesis of Crime and Punishment, published serially in 1866, we lay in Dostoevsky's long-held fascination with the psychology of transgression and the profound consequences of moral choices. He had conceived of a story exploring the inner world of a young man driven to commit a heinous act, not out of malice, but from a distorted intellectual theory and a desperate need for self-affirmation. The novel delves into the mind of Rodion Raskolnikov, a former student in St. Petersburg, who, convinced of his own intellectual superiority and the right to transcend conventional morality, murders an old pawnbroker. Dostoevsky meticulously traces Raskolnikov's tormented journey through guilt, paranoia, and psychological torment following the crime. The narrative is a profound exploration of several central themes: the nature of guilt and its inescapable burden, the possibility of redemption through suffering, and the corrosive effects of intellectual pride when severed from human empathy and spiritual truth. It examines the dangerous allure of utilitarian ethics and the idea of extraordinary men who believe themselves exempt from moral laws. Throughout the creation of Crime and Punishment, Dostoevsky poured his own observations of poverty, the urban landscape of St. Petersburg, and his deep understanding of the human psyche into the narrative. This was a period of quiet, intense creation, where the exigencies of his personal circumstances merged with his profound artistic vision, resulting in a work that not only captivated its contemporary readers, but continues to resonate with its timeless insights into the darkest corners of the human heart and the enduring quest for moral reckoning. Yet the relentless pressure of deadlines and the sheer volume of his creative output, particularly with the ongoing serialization of Crime and Punishment, pushed Dostoevsky to seek a novel solution. He had made a binding agreement with his publisher, F.T. Stelovsky, for a new novel, The Gambler, to be delivered by a specific date, failing which Stelovsky would gain the rights to all of Dostoevsky's past and future works for 9 years. Faced with this severe ultimatum, Dostoevsky, never a quick writer by hand, found himself in a desperate race against time. It was in this critical moment that a young woman named Anna Grigorievna Snitkina entered his life. A student of shorthand or stenography, Anna was just 20 years old when she was recommended to Dostoevsky. She possessed a quiet demeanour, an astute mind, and a remarkable proficiency in her chosen skill, a skill still relatively new and unconventional in Russia at the time. Dostoevsky, then 45, was initially sceptical, unfamiliar with the process of dictation. He was accustomed to the solitary, painstaking act of writing and rewriting by hand. However, the urgency of his situation compelled him to try this modern method. Anna Grigorievna arrived at his apartment, prepared to transcribe his thoughts as quickly as he could voice them. Their initial working sessions were focused, almost entirely professional. Dostoevsky would pace the room, sometimes speaking rapidly, sometimes pausing in contemplation, as Anna Grigorievna sat silently, her pen moving with swift, precise strokes across the paper. She was a calm, steady presence, entirely absorbed in her task, never interrupting, never offering an opinion, simply capturing the stream of his consciousness. This quiet efficiency was precisely what Dostoevsky needed. He found in Anna a remarkably capable and unobtrusive assistant. Her ability to keep pace with his often erratic creative flow was invaluable. Within a remarkably short period, approximately 26 days, Dostoevsky was able to dictate the entirety of The Gambler. This intense collaboration marked the beginning of a truly unique and transformative relationship, born out of necessity, yet destined to evolve far beyond the boundaries of a simple employer-employee dynamic. Anna Grigorievna's quiet presence and indispensable skill had not only saved Dostoevsky from financial ruin, but had also introduced a new, stabilizing force into his often turbulent existence. The professional collaboration between Fyodor Dostoevsky and Anna Grigorievna Snitkina soon deepened into a personal affection. Despite the significant age difference, with Dostoevsky being 25 years her senior, a profound connection began to form between the writer and his quiet, efficient stenographer. He recognized in her not only a keen intelligence, but also a steadfast character and an unwavering devotion. In February of 1867, Dostoevsky proposed to Anna Grigorievna. Their marriage marked a pivotal turning point in his often turbulent life. Where his previous years had been characterized by financial chaos, emotional turmoil, and the constant pressure of debts, Anna brought a much-needed sense of order and calm. She was a woman of remarkable practicality and quiet strength, as qualities that proved indispensable to Dostoevsky's well-being and his continued literary output. Anna took on the formidable task of managing his finances, a realm where Dostoevsky had consistently struggled. She meticulously organized his accounts, dealt with creditors, and, perhaps most importantly, took control of the publishing and distribution of his works. Under her astute management, Dostoevsky's financial situation, though never entirely free of strain, began to stabilize. She understood the value of his writing and worked tirelessly to ensure he received fair compensation, freeing him to concentrate on his creative endeavors without the constant distraction of monetary anxieties. Beyond her practical skills, Anna provided Dostoevsky with a profound sense of emotional support and unwavering understanding. She accepted his complexities, his illnesses, his gambling addiction, and his often difficult temperament with a quiet dignity and an abiding love. Her presence created a stable home environment, a sanctuary where he could find peace and focus. Her devotion was absolute, and she became not only his wife but also his most trusted confidant, his editor and his steadfast protector. This second marriage, built on mutual respect and Anna's quiet strength, laid the foundation for Dostoevsky's most productive and ultimately most celebrated literary period. Despite the stabilizing influence of Anna, Dostoevsky's overwhelming debts continued to loom large. To escape the relentless demands of his creditors and the constant threat of debtor's prison, the newly married couple made the difficult decision to leave Russia. In April of 1867, they embarked on a 4-year period of self-imposed exile, living across various European cities, including Baden-Baden, Geneva, Vevey, and Florence. Life abroad was far from a comfortable escape. It was a period marked by quiet struggles and persistent hardship. They lived frugally, often moving from rented rooms to small apartments, always conscious of their limited funds. The initial hope that the change of scenery would curb Dostoevsky's gambling addiction proved to be largely unfounded. He continued to frequent the roulette tables, often losing what little money they possessed, plunging Anna into despair and exacerbating their financial precariousness. These relapses were a source of immense tension and emotional pain for the devoted Anna. During these years, their family began to grow, here bringing moments of profound joy mixed with deep sorrow. Their first child, a daughter named Sonia, was born in Geneva in 1868. Tragically, she lived for only 3 months, her death a devastating blow to both parents, particularly to Dostoevsky, who carried the grief of this loss for many years. 2 years later, in Dresden, their second child, Lyubov, was born, bringing a fragile hope back into their lives. The constant movement, the financial strain, and the profound sorrow of losing a child cast a sombre shadow over their time in Europe. Despite these personal adversities, Dostoevsky continued to write, finding solace and purpose in his work. These years abroad, though challenging, allowed him a certain detachment from the immediate pressures of Russian literary life, providing a unique vantage point from which to observe European society and reflect on his own country's destiny. While living in Europe, amidst personal hardship and financial uncertainty, Dostoevsky embarked on one of his most ambitious literary projects, the novel The Idiot, published in 1869. This work represented a profound artistic challenge for him, as he set out to portray a character of unparalleled moral beauty and innocence within a morally complex and often corrupt world. His stated aim was to depict a positively beautiful man, a figure akin to Christ, but rendered in a contemporary Russian context. The central character of The Idiot is Prince Lev Nikolaevich Mishkin, a young man returning to Russia after years in a Swiss sanatorium where he was treated for epilepsy. Mishkin possesses an extraordinary degree of compassion, humility, and spiritual purity. He sees the world with an almost childlike honesty, free from the cynicism and self-interest that characterize many of those he encounters. His very presence often acts as a mirror, reflecting the hidden motives and inner turmoil of others. However, Mishkin's innocence, far from being a protective shield, makes him vulnerable to the passions and intrigues of the society he enters. The narrative explores the tragic interplay between his idealism and the destructive forces of human desire, pride, and societal conventions. He finds himself entangled in a tumultuous love triangle involving Nastasia Filipovna Barashkova, a beautiful and tormented woman, and Parfen Rogozhin, a wealthy and intensely passionate man. Through these relationships, Dostoevsky meticulously examines the complexities of human nature. He delves into themes of love, jealousy, sacrifice, and madness, questioning whether true goodness can survive, let alone triumph, in a world driven by darker impulses. Prince Mishkin, despite his innate goodness, ultimately struggles to navigate the treacherous currents of human emotion and social expectations. His inability to reconcile the conflicting demands placed upon him and to prevent the suffering around him, leads to a devastating conclusion, suggesting the profound difficulty, perhaps even the impossibility, of embodying pure virtue in a fallen world. The novel stands as a meditation on the nature of Christian love and its limits in the face of human brokenness. Following the completion of The Idiot and his return to Russia, Dostoevsky turned his attention to the escalating political tensions of his time, finding particular inspiration in a real-life event that deeply disturbed him. This was the notorious Nechayev affair of 1869, where a radical revolutionary cell murdered one of its own members for perceived disloyalty. This incident became the catalyst for his next major novel, Demons, also known as The Possessed, published in 1872. Demons emerged as Dostoevsky's most overtly political novel, a stark warning against the destructive potential of radical ideologies. He sought to dissect the phenomenon of nihilism, a philosophy gaining traction among certain segments of the Russian intelligentsia, which advocated for the destruction of all existing institutions and values without offering any clear alternative. The novel portrays a group of young, self-proclaimed revolutionaries in a provincial Russian town whose lofty ideals gradually devolve into chaos, tyranny, and ultimately murder. The characters in Demons are often driven by a mix of intellectual arrogance, boredom, and a profound spiritual emptiness. Figures like Pyotr Stepanovich Verkovensky, the manipulative leader, and Nikolai Stavrogin, the enigmatic and morally vacant central figure, represent different facets of this ideological crisis. Through their interactions and their increasingly extreme actions, Dostoevsky explores the psychological underpinnings of revolutionary fervour, depicting how abstract ideas, when divorced from moral grounding and human compassion, can lead to monstrous outcomes. The novel is a meticulous examination of how seemingly noble intentions can become twisted into instruments of oppression and self-destruction. Dostoevsky suggests that the pursuit of a utopian society through violent means inevitably leads to a loss of individual freedom and a descent into spiritual darkness. Demons serves as a prophetic critique of revolutionary movements that prioritize ideology over humanity, quietly cautioning against the dangers of unbridled intellectualism and the seductive power of radical change. It was a profound reflection on the spiritual and social consequences of abandoning traditional faith and moral frameworks in the pursuit of purely political aims. In July of 1871, after 4 years of tumultuous self-imposed exile, Fyodor and Anna Dostoevsky finally returned to Russia. This homecoming marked a significant shift in their lives, initiating a period of greater stability and relative domestic tranquility that had long eluded the author. The frantic pace of their European years, dictated by financial pressures and Dostoevsky's gambling compulsions, gradually receded, replaced by a more settled existence. Upon their return, the Dostoevskys settled in St. Petersburg, a city that, despite its often harsh climate, remained central to Dostoevsky's creative imagination. Anna, with her characteristic prudence and organizational skills, began to systematically manage their finances, slowly alleviating the crushing burden of debt that had plagued them for years. Her diligent efforts brought a much-needed sense of order to their household, allowing Fyodor a more predictable environment for his demanding literary work. This period was also marked by the quiet joys of family life. Their daughter, Lyubov, had been born in Dresden in 1869, and their son, Fyodor, was born in St. Petersburg in 1871, shortly after their return. Dostoevsky, who had experienced profound sorrow with the loss of his first child, Sonia, found deep contentment in his growing family. He often spent time with his children, observing their development and delighting in their presence. These domestic scenes provided a tender counterpoint to the intense intellectual and emotional dramas that unfolded within his novels. Anna meticulously chronicled these years, painting a picture of a devoted husband and father, albeit one still prone to intense moods and periods of deep concentration on his writing. The children brought a lightness and warmth to their home, thus softening the edges of Dostoevsky's often brooding temperament. Despite his continued struggles with epilepsy and the demands of his literary output, these years saw Dostoevsky experience a profound sense of rootedness and belonging, nurtured by Anna's steadfast love and the innocent presence of their young family. This newfound domestic peace allowed him to channel his considerable energies into his writing with a renewed sense of purpose and stability, laying the groundwork for some of his most profound literary achievements. In 1873, Fyodor Dostoevsky embarked upon a unique literary endeavour that would occupy him intermittently for much of the remainder of his life: a writer's diary. This singular publication began as a regular column in the conservative periodical The Citizen, which Dostoevsky edited for a time. However, it soon evolved into an independent monthly journal, almost entirely written by Dostoevsky himself, allowing him an unprecedented direct line of communication with his readers. A writer's diary was unlike any other publication of its time. It was a capacious vessel for Dostoevsky's thoughts, encompassing an extraordinary breadth of topics. Within its pages, he explored pressing political issues of the day, offering his often provocative perspectives on Russia's role in Europe, the Eastern Question, and the internal challenges facing the empire. He delved into literary criticism, analysing the works of his contemporaries and reflecting on the nature of art and storytelling. Social commentary formed a significant part of the diary as he examined crime, education, the judicial system, and the changing moral fabric of Russian society, often drawing on real-life events that captivated public attention. What made a writer's diary truly distinctive was its voice. It possessed an intimate, almost conversational tone, as if Dostoevsky were engaging in a direct personal dialogue with each reader. He shared anecdotes, recounted dreams, and offered deeply personal reflections, blurring the lines between public discourse and private introspection. This unique approach fostered a profound connection with his audience, who felt they were gaining direct access to the mind of one of Russia's most influential thinkers. Through the diary, Dostoevsky refined his Pochvenichestvo philosophy, advocating for a return to native Russian soil and spiritual values, distinct from Western European rationalism and materialism. He used the platform to articulate his vision for Russia's future, emphasizing the spiritual mission he believed his nation was destined to fulfill. The diary became a powerful instrument for Dostoevsky to shape public opinion, provoke debate, and explore the complex interplay between individual psychology and national destiny, all presented with an unflinching honesty that resonated deeply with a wide readership. Throughout the 1870s, a notable shift began to occur in Fyodor Dostoevsky's standing within Russian society. Having endured decades of obscurity, poverty, and critical misunderstanding, he slowly but steadily emerged from the shadows to become a figure of considerable public recognition and influence. This period marked a transformation from a controversial novelist to a respected public intellectual whose opinions were increasingly sought after and valued. His novels, particularly Crime and Punishment, The Idiot, and Demons, had, by this point, cemented his reputation as a formidable literary force, but it was a writer's diary that truly amplified his public presence. Through this unique publication, Dostoevsky cultivated a direct and personal relationship with a growing readership. He was no longer merely an author whose works were interpreted by critics. He was a living voice, engaging directly with the moral, social, and political anxieties of his time. People from all strata of Russian society began to read the diary with anticipation, discussing its contents in drawing rooms, student dormitories, and intellectual salons. His essays and commentaries sparked lively debates, and his often unconventional perspectives on justice, faith, and the Russian character prompted introspection and conversation. Dostoevsky's pronouncements on the Slavic question, the role of orthodoxy, and the perceived spiritual dangers of westernization resonated deeply with many, establishing him as a significant voice in the ongoing ideological struggles of the era. This burgeoning fame was not merely confined to literary circles. Dostoevsky found himself increasingly invited to public events, literary gatherings, and even private audiences where his insights were solicited. His presence, once marginalized, now commanded attention. He became a symbol of a certain strain of Russian thought, one that emphasized spiritual depth, national identity, and a profound, often tormented understanding of the human soul. This quiet ascent to public prominence reflected a society grappling with profound questions, finding in Dostoevsky a writer who articulated their deepest fears and aspirations with an unparalleled intensity. Amidst the growing public recognition and the ongoing serialization of a writer's diary, Dostoevsky embarked on another significant novel, published in 1875. This work, initially titled Disorder but ultimately known as The Adolescent or A Raw Youth, marked a return to the full-scale novel form, distinct from the episodic nature of his diary. It was a deeply introspective exploration, once again delving into the complex psychological landscape of a young protagonist navigating the moral ambiguities of Russian society. The central figure of the adolescent is Arkady Dolgoruki, an illegitimate son grappling with his origins and striving to forge his own identity in a world that often feels alienating and unjust. His quest is not for material wealth in itself, but for a particular kind of power, the idea of becoming a Rothschild, an independent financial magnate, as a means to assert his will and find a place in society. This ambition, however, is constantly challenged by the emotional turbulence of his youth, his conflicted relationships, and the moral dilemmas he encounters. Through Arkady, Dostoevsky continued his profound engagement with the theme of generational conflict, a recurring motif in his later works. The novel meticulously portrays the chasm between the older generation, burdened by their past and often compromised by their ideals, and the younger generation, full of unformed passions and searching for new truths. This tension explores how different worldviews clash and coalesce, shaping the individual's moral trajectory. The Adolescent also reflects Dostoevsky's enduring fascination with moral development. Arkady's journey is one of profound internal struggle, as he grapples with nascent ideas of good and evil, integrity and corruption. His experiences expose him to various philosophical currents and human frailties, forcing him to confront the complexities of human nature and society. The novel, therefore, is not merely a coming-of-age story, but a detailed psychological study of a soul in formation, striving to find meaning and a stable moral compass amidst the swirling currents of modern life. It served as another testament to Dostoevsky's relentless examination of the human condition, seen through the lens of a developing consciousness. In June of 1880, a pivotal moment in Dostoevsky's public life unfolded at the unveiling of the Pushkin Monument in Moscow. This event, intended to celebrate Russia's greatest poet, became a stage for Dostoevsky to articulate his most cherished beliefs before a diverse and expectant audience. Having been invited to speak, he prepared meticulously, understanding the profound significance of the occasion. His address, delivered on June 8th, was not merely a eulogy for Pushkin. It was a powerful exposition of Dostoevsky's vision for Russia and its place in the world. He spoke of Pushkin as a universal genius, capable of embodying the spirit of various peoples and cultures within his Russian soul. This, Dostoevsky argued, was not merely Pushkin's unique talent, but an inherent quality of the Russian character itself, a capacity for all humanity, for understanding and embracing the spirit of all nations. The speech resonated deeply with themes of reconciliation and unity. Dostoevsky called for an end to the bitter ideological divides that had plagued Russian society, particularly between the Westernizers and the Slavophiles. He suggested that Pushkin, through his art, had already shown the path to a higher synthesis, where Russia's unique spirit could encompass and harmonize the best aspect of both Eastern and Western thought. He envisioned Russia's mission not as one of conquest or dominance, but as a spiritual mission to ultimately bring reconciliation to the nations of Europe, through its boundless capacity for sympathy and understanding. The reaction to Dostoevsky's Pushkin speech was extraordinary. The hall erupted in an outpouring of emotion. People wept, embraced, and cheered, transcending their usual political and social divisions in a rare moment of shared national sentiment. It was described as an event of almost mystical power, where Dostoevsky, through his words, seemed to momentarily unite a fractured society. This quiet triumph marked the zenith of his public influence, affirming his status not just as a great novelist, but as a prophet for the Russian soul. Even amidst the public acclaim following the Pushkin speech, Fyodor Dostoevsky's mind was already deeply immersed in the creation of what would become his final and arguably most profound work, The Brothers Karamazov. The seeds of this grand novel had been germinating for many years, evolving through various iterations and tentative outlines. It was not a sudden inspiration, but rather a culmination of his life's experiences, his philosophical inquiries, and his spiritual struggles. Dostoevsky had long harboured an ambition to write a truly monumental novel that would encapsulate his deepest convictions about humanity, faith, doubt, and the nature of good and evil. He envisioned the brothers Karamazov as a comprehensive canvas upon which he could explore the fundamental questions that had preoccupied him since his youth and intensified during his Siberian exile. The work was conceived as a vast intellectual and spiritual drama, a battleground for the soul of man and the soul of Russia itself, and he intended it to be a synthesis of all his previous literary explorations, drawing together the psychological intensity of Crime and Punishment, the philosophical depth of Notes from Underground, and the spiritual quests of The Idiot and Demons. The novel was planned to be a multi-volume epic, though only the first part, which we know today, was completed before his death. Its scope was immense, aiming to delve into the very origins of belief and atheism, the complexities of family relationships, the role of suffering, and the possibility of redemption. For Dostoevsky, The Brothers Karamazov was more than just a story. It was a testament. He sought to present a compelling argument for the necessity of faith, particularly Orthodox Christianity, in a world increasingly challenged by rationalism, nihilism, and scientific materialism. He wanted to confront the most difficult questions head-on, giving voice to powerful arguments against God and morality, only to then, through the narrative's unfolding, offer a profound counter-argument rooted in love, compassion, and spiritual experience. It was to be his ultimate artistic and philosophical statement, a distillation of his entire world-view. Within the vast tapestry of The Brothers Karamazov, a series of profound and enduring themes are woven, each contributing to the novel's immense philosophical weight. At its narrative core lies the exploration of parricide, the murder of a father, which serves as a potent symbol for rebellion against authority, tradition, and even God. This crime, both literal and metaphorical, ripples through the lives of the Karamazov brothers, exposing the depths of human sin and the complexities of guilt and innocence. Beyond the crime itself, the novel delves deeply into the eternal struggle between faith and doubt. Dostoevsky presents characters who embody fervent belief, like the elder Zosimir and Alyosha Karamazov, alongside those consumed by intellectual skepticism and spiritual torment, such as Ivan Karamazov. Through their dialogues and internal monologues, the novel gives eloquent voice to both the arguments for a benevolent God and the compelling reasons for his non-existence, particularly in the face of human suffering. Another central pillar of the work is the concept of free will. Dostoevsky meticulously examines the burden and responsibility that accompany human freedom. Is man truly free to choose his path, or are his actions predetermined by heredity, environment, or divine decree? The characters grapple with the implications of their choices, revealing the psychological and moral consequences of exercising or failing to exercise their autonomy. This exploration extends into the realm of morality, questioning the very foundations upon which ethical codes are built. If God does not exist, as Ivan famously postulates, then everything is permitted. The novel quietly yet powerfully probes the chaotic implications of such a worldview, contrasting it with the moral framework offered by spiritual conviction. Ultimately, The Brothers Karamazov is a sustained and multifaceted search for spiritual truth. It does not offer easy answers or simple resolutions. Instead, it poses profound questions with a quiet insistence, inviting the reader to engage in their own contemplation. And it explores how individuals confront suffering, grapple with temptation, and ultimately strive for meaning in a world often devoid of obvious justice. The novel suggests that true spiritual understanding is not found in intellectual debates alone, but in acts of love, compassion, and self-sacrifice, even amidst the most profound human failings. As the monumental task of completing The Brothers Karamazov neared its end, Fyodor Dostoevsky found himself increasingly besieged by the frailties of his own physical form. His health, never robust, began a steady and noticeable decline in these later years. The persistent shadow of epilepsy, which had haunted him since his youth and intensified after his Siberian exile, grew darker. Seizures became more frequent, each episode leaving him weakened, disoriented, and requiring a prolonged period of recovery. These moments of intense physical and mental upheaval were a constant intrusion into his creative process, demanding immense resilience to overcome. Compounding the challenges posed by his epilepsy was the insidious progression of emphysema. This chronic lung condition made breathing increasingly difficult, particularly in the cold Russian winters. The simple act of walking or speaking for extended periods would leave him breathless, a constant reminder of his diminishing strength. A persistent cough became a familiar companion, a quiet, rasping sound that underscored his physical discomfort. The combination of these ailments created a pervasive sense of physical pain and exhaustion that coloured his daily existence. Despite this escalating physical burden, Dostoevsky maintained an almost miraculous dedication to his final masterpiece. He worked with a quiet, determined intensity, often pushing himself to the very limits of his endurance. His wife, Anna Grigorievna, observed his struggle firsthand, noting the profound effort it required for him to sit at his desk, to concentrate, and to transcribe the complex narratives and philosophical arguments that filled his mind. Each sentence, each paragraph, each chapter of The Brothers Karamazov was wrested from him amidst discomfort and fatigue. The completion of the novel became a testament not only to his literary genius, but also to his extraordinary willpower. He understood that this work was to be the summation of his life's thought, a comprehensive statement on faith, morality, and the human condition, and the quiet struggle to bring this vision to fruition, even as his body betrayed him, imbued the work with an additional layer of profound human experience. It was a race against time, a quiet battle waged with pen and paper against the relentless march of illness. The final period of writing, the brothers Karamazov was characterized by an almost frantic intensity, as Fyodor Dostoevsky raced against the limitations of his failing health. Each day presented a renewed challenge, a quiet battle against physical discomfort and the ever-present threat of epileptic seizures. Yet the vision for his culminating work, a grand synthesis of his life's philosophical and spiritual inquiries, propelled him forward. He understood the immense significance of this novel, not merely as a story but as a profound statement on humanity's eternal questions. Working meticulously, often for long hours into the night, he poured his thoughts onto paper. His wife, Anna Grigorievna, played an indispensable role during this strenuous period. She managed their household, protected his time from interruptions, and most importantly served as his copyist and confidant. Her steady presence and unwavering support allowed him to focus almost entirely on the creative act, providing a vital buffer against the demands of the outside world. This partnership was crucial in enabling him to sustain the rigorous pace required for such a monumental undertaking. The quiet dedication he exhibited was remarkable. Despite the increasing difficulty in breathing due to emphysema and the debilitating effects of his epilepsy, Dostoevsky pressed on, for driven by an inner imperative to complete what he considered his most important work. There was no outward show of struggle, but a deep internal perseverance that manifested in the steady accumulation of manuscript pages. He would revise, refine, and restructure, ensuring that every word contributed to the overarching themes and intricate character development. The completion of The Brothers Karamazov in November 1880, after nearly 3 years of intense labour, was a moment of profound significance. It represented the culmination of a lifetime of observation, reflection, and artistic endeavour. The final chapters were delivered with a sense of quiet triumph, a testament to his extraordinary resilience and unwavering commitment to his literary calling. This colossal achievement, brought forth amidst such personal suffering, has secured his place as one of the most profound voices in world literature. After the immense effort of completing The Brothers Karamazov, a work that had consumed his creative energies for years, Fyodor Dostoevsky's health, already fragile, began to decline more rapidly. The strain of his literary endeavours, coupled with a lifetime of physical ailments and emotional turmoil, had taken its toll. He had long suffered from emphysema, and his epileptic seizures, a constant companion since his Siberian exile, became more frequent and severe in his later years. The immediate circumstances surrounding his death were domestic and quiet, a stark contrast to the dramatic narratives of his novels. On January 28th, according to the old calendar, or February 9th, 1881 by the new style, Dostoevsky passed away in his home in St. Petersburg. The end came swiftly and for the most part peacefully. He had experienced a pulmonary hemorrhage, likely exacerbated by his emphysema, which had grown progressively worse. His wife, Anna Grigorievna, was by his side, providing comfort and witness to his final moments. Their children were also present, completing the intimate circle around him. It was an end to a life that had been anything but quiet, filled with extraordinary experiences, profound suffering, and unparalleled literary creation. The man who had explored the deepest recesses of the human soul in his written works, who had grappled with questions of faith, doubt, and redemption, now faced his own ultimate transition. Dostoevsky's passing marked the end of an era for Russian literature. He had lived a life of intense engagement with the spiritual and philosophical currents of his time, translating his personal struggles and insights into timeless narratives. His death, in its quiet simplicity, belied the tumultuous and rich tapestry of his existence. He left behind a legacy of works that would continue to challenge and inspire generations, exploring the complexities of human nature with an unmatched psychological depth. The quiet passing in his St. Petersburg home was the final chapter in a story of profound experience and enduring literary genius. The news of Fyodor Dostoevsky's death spread quickly through St. Petersburg and then across Russia, eliciting an immediate and profound public reaction. The quiet passing in his home soon gave way to an extraordinary outpouring of grief and respect, far surpassing what might have been expected for a literary figure, even one of his stature. It became clear that Dostoevsky had transcended the role of a mere writer. He had become a national conscience, a voice for the Russian soul, and his loss was felt deeply by many segments of society. For several days, people from all walks of life, from students and intellectuals to common labourers, gathered outside his residence, offering their condolences and sharing their sorrow. This spontaneous assembly of mourners underscored the unique connection Dostoevsky had forged with his readership. His works, which delved into the moral and spiritual dilemmas of humanity, resonated with a public seeking meaning and guidance in a rapidly changing world. The funeral, held on February 1st, 1881, was an event of immense scale and quiet solemnity. It was not merely a gathering of literary colleagues or admirers, but a vast public demonstration of reverence. Thousands upon thousands of people joined the procession that accompanied his coffin through the streets of St. Petersburg. The sheer number of attendees transformed the funeral into a quiet testament to his widespread influence and the deep affection many held for him. Students carried wreaths representing academic institutions and youth movements who saw in Dostoevsky a prophet and a guide. Orthodox clergy participated, acknowledging his profound religious faith and his exploration of Christian themes in his writing. Various social groups and professional organizations also sent representatives, each recognizing a part of themselves in his complex narratives. The procession moved slowly, a silent, unified stream of humanity, reflecting the diverse fabric of Russian society that Dostoevsky had so meticulously portrayed in his novels. It was a remarkable sight, a quiet collective tribute to a man who had, through his art, touched the very heart of his nation. The journey concluded at the Alexander Nevsky Lavra, where Dostoevsky was laid to rest in the Tikhvin cemetery, among other revered figures of Russian culture. His funeral was a powerful, understated affirmation of his enduring place not just in literature, but in the collective memory and consciousness of the Russian people. The profound public mourning that followed Fyodor Dostoevsky's death was not merely an emotional response. It immediately translated into a sustained engagement with his literary and philosophical legacy within Russia. His passing, rather than diminishing his presence, seemed to amplify it, solidifying his position as an indispensable voice in the ongoing intellectual and spiritual debates of the nation. His works, already widely read, became subjects of even more intense scrutiny and discussion. New editions of his novels and shorter stories were published, finding eager readers across all social strata. University students, in particular, found themselves drawn to the depths of his psychological explorations and the urgent moral questions he posed. Literary critics, whether they agreed with his political or religious stances, could not ignore the power and originality of his narrative artistry. His distinctive style, characterized by polyphonic voices and intense internal monologues, continued to challenge and inspire subsequent generations of Russian writers. The intellectual landscape of Russia in the late 19th and early 20th centuries was quietly but profoundly shaped by Dostoevsky's ideas. His critiques of nihilism, his warnings against radical ideologies, and his deep-seated belief in the spiritual essence of the Russian people resonated with many who grappled with the country's uncertain future. Debates surrounding his concept of poshvenichestvo, or return to the soil, continued to animate discussions among Slavophiles and Westernizers, offering a distinctly Russian path for national development. His exploration of suffering, redemption, and the complexities of human freedom provided a rich philosophical foundation for various schools of thought, or the Dostoevsky question, the unending inquiry into the meaning and implications of his work, became a central feature of Russian intellectual life, a quiet but persistent undercurrent that influenced philosophy, theology, and political discourse for decades after his passing. His death marked not an end, but a significant new chapter in the life of his ideas within his homeland. While Fyodor Dostoevsky's impact within Russia was immediate and profound, his journey to global recognition was a more gradual process, unfolding quietly across borders through the painstaking work of translators. In the decades following his death, as the 19th century gave way to the 20th, the unique power and depth of his narratives began to slowly penetrate the literary consciousness of Europe and beyond. Early translations were often imperfect, yet they carried enough of the original's raw power to intrigue and challenge readers in other languages. French versions appeared, followed by German and then English, each offering a window into the turbulent world of Dostoevsky's characters and ideas. These initial forays laid the groundwork for a broader appreciation, often sparking curiosity among discerning readers and writers who sensed something profoundly new and unsettling in his work. The true surge in Dostoevsky's international fame commenced more emphatically in the early 20th century. In the English-speaking world, the meticulous and empathetic translations by Constance Garnett proved pivotal. Beginning in the 1890s and continuing for several decades, Garnett systematically rendered his major novels into English, capturing much of their psychological intensity and philosophical weight. Her work made Dostoevsky accessible to a vast new audience, allowing his complex characters and profound spiritual dilemmas to resonate far beyond their Russian origins. Across Europe, similar efforts were underway. German intellectuals and authors in particular found themselves deeply drawn to Dostoevsky's exploration of the human psyche and the darker currents of existence. Figures such as Friedrich Nietzsche had already recognized his genius, and this early endorsement helped to cement his reputation among continental thinkers. This quiet spread of influence was not always a matter of immediate widespread popularity. Rather, it often began in intellectual circles among philosophers, theologians, deists, and avant-garde artists who perceived in Dostoevsky a writer grappling with universal questions of morality, freedom, and the nature of good and evil. His unique ability to delve into the extreme conditions of the human soul, to portray characters driven by contradictory impulses, began to be recognized as a significant contribution to world literature, gradually extending his quiet authority across diverse cultural landscapes. Beyond the realm of literature, Fyodor Dostoevsky's work exerted a profound and enduring influence on philosophical thought, particularly in shaping the contours of existentialism, psychology, and theology. His novels were not mere stories. They were vast, intricate laboratories for exploring the most fundamental questions of human existence. Dostoevsky's relentless examination of human freedom, often depicted as a terrifying burden rather than a simple blessing, resonated deeply with later existentialist thinkers. Figures like Søren Kierkegaard, though preceding Dostoevsky, shared a thematic kinship, and later the French existentialists, notably Albert Camus and Jean-Paul Sartre, found in his characters a powerful prefiguration of their own philosophical concerns. The Underground Man, for instance, with his defiant rejection of rationalism and his embrace of arbitrary will, offered a stark portrayal of individual liberty pushed to its chaotic extremes. His narratives wrestled with the idea that humans are condemned to be free, responsible for their choices in a seemingly meaningless world, a core tenet of existentialist thought. His insights into the complexities of the human psyche were equally groundbreaking. Long before the formal establishment of psychology as a discipline, Dostoevsky delved into the irrational, the subconscious, and the tormented inner lives of his characters. He explored guilt, obsession, neurosis, and the fragmented nature of identity with an unparalleled intensity. Sigmund Freud, the founder of psychoanalysis, acknowledged Dostoevsky's profound psychological penetration, particularly in works like The Brothers Karamazov, recognizing in them a deep understanding of parricidal impulses and the Oedipal complex. Theological thought also found fertile ground in Dostoevsky's work. His characters continually grapple with faith, doubt, and the problem of evil. The Grand Inquisitor's legend in The Brothers Karamazov stands as a monumental critique of organized religion and a profound meditation on free will versus enforced happiness. He explored the suffering of innocence, the nature of divine justice, and the possibility of redemption, not through abstract theological treatises, but through the lived, often agonizing experiences of his creations. Through these narratives, Dostoevsky offered a complex, often unsettling, but undeniably rich contribution to humanity's ongoing dialogue with its own spiritual and philosophical foundations. The literary influence of Fyodor Dostoevsky casts a long and indelible shadow across subsequent generations of writers, transforming the very possibilities of narrative art. His unique approach to storytelling, thus characterized by intense psychological realism and what Mikhail Bakhtin termed polyphony, reshaped the novel as a form. Dostoevsky's narrative techniques broke new ground. He often employed multiple, competing viewpoints, allowing his characters to articulate their own philosophies and worldviews without the authorial voice necessarily endorsing one over another. This polyphonic style created a vibrant, often turbulent intellectual space within his novels, where ideas clashed and evolved, mirroring the complexities of real-world discourse. This departure from a singular, authoritative authorial perspective opened up new avenues for literary expression, challenging writers to create more dynamic and multifaceted narratives. His psychological realism, born from his deep understanding of human suffering, moral dilemmas, and the darker recesses of the mind, provided a blueprint for exploring inner landscapes with unprecedented depth. Writers who followed him learned to delve into the motivations, contradictions, and subconscious drives of their characters with a similar intensity. The fragmented, often tormented consciousness of Dostoevsky's figures, grappling with guilt, redemption, and existential despair, became a template for depicting the modern individual's inner turmoil. The echoes of Dostoevsky can be discerned in the works of numerous literary giants across diverse cultures and eras. William Faulkner, for instance, in his exploration of Southern Gothic themes and the intricate psychological states of his characters, displayed a Dostoevskian intensity. Franz Kafka's alienated protagonists, entrapped in bureaucratic nightmares and wrestling with inexplicable guilt, share a spiritual kinship with figures from Notes from Underground or Crime and Punishment. Even modernist writers like Virginia Woolf and James Joyce, in their stream of consciousness narratives, were indirectly influenced by Dostoevsky's pioneering efforts to represent the fluid and often chaotic nature of human thought. His legacy is not merely one of themes, but of a fundamental shift in how literature understands and portrays the human soul. The enduring relevance of Fyodor Dostoevsky's themes speaks to the timeless nature of the human condition itself. His profound explorations of good and evil, faith and doubt, freedom and responsibility, and the inherent nature of human suffering continue to resonate deeply within contemporary society, inviting quiet contemplation on questions that defy easy answers. In an age often marked by moral relativism and the erosion of traditional belief systems, Dostoevsky's unflinching gaze into the abyss of human depravity and the heights of spiritual aspiration remains remarkably pertinent. He did not shy away from depicting the most heinous acts, nor did he neglect the possibility of redemption and grace. This dual vision, acknowledging both the darkness and the light within humanity, offers a complex, nuanced perspective that resists simplistic interpretations of morality. His characters' struggles with their consciences, their desperate search for meaning, and their confrontations with the consequences of their choices mirror the ethical dilemmas faced by individuals and societies today. The tension between faith and doubt, so central to his major works, continues to be a universal human experience. Dostoevsky himself grappled with these opposing forces throughout his life, and he imbued his characters with similar internal conflicts. Whether it is Ivan Karamazov's intellectual rebellion against God, or Prince Mishkin's Christ-like innocence in a corrupt world, these explorations of belief and skepticism offer a rich framework for understanding the spiritual journeys of people in any era. The questions he posed about the existence of God, the meaning of suffering, and the possibility of genuine love in a fallen world are perennial. Furthermore, his meditations on freedom and responsibility resonate profoundly in a world grappling with individual autonomy versus societal obligation. Dostoevsky understood that true freedom carries a heavy burden, often leading to isolation or despair when not tempered by love and self-sacrifice. His insights into the destructive potential of unchecked will and the liberating power of humble acceptance offer a sober reflection on the choices we make, both personally and collectively. The nature of human suffering, often presented as a path to purification or a consequence of sin, also remains a deeply felt and frequently discussed aspect of the human experience, making his narratives as relevant today as they were in his own time. Fyodor Dostoevsky's life was indeed a tapestry woven from profound contradictions and immense depth, a journey marked by personal suffering that ultimately fueled an unparalleled literary creation. From the constrained circumstances of his childhood to the crushing weight of penal servitude, his existence was a testament to the human capacity for endurance amidst adversity. Yet, it was precisely these trials that forged the unique sensibility evident in every page he wrote. His early literary promise, tragically interrupted by the mock execution and subsequent exile to Siberia, served not as an end, but as a crucible. The years spent among criminals and outcasts, stripped of status and comfort, offered him an intimate, unvarnished view of human nature. This profound spiritual inquiry, born from a period of intense hardship, transformed him from a promising writer into a visionary artist. He emerged from Siberia not broken, but deepened, carrying within him an understanding of the soul's complexities that few others possessed. Despite recurring financial crises, the burden of epilepsy, and the often turbulent nature of his personal relationships, Dostoevsky exhibited a quiet strength and resilience. He returned to writing with an urgency born of conviction, pouring his accumulated insights and philosophical struggles into novels that would reshape the literary landscape. Each work became a vessel for his relentless exploration of faith, doubt, and the intricate workings of the human psyche. His characters, often tormented and contradictory themselves, were reflections of the internal battles he waged throughout his own life. The stability found in his second marriage to Anna Grigorievna provided the necessary calm for his most monumental achievements. It was during this period that he synthesized his life's experiences and spiritual inquiries into masterpieces such as The Brothers Karamazov a testament to his ability to transform suffering into art. His journey was a quiet, relentless ascent, moving from personal pain to universal insight, demonstrating how deeply lived experience, when channeled through an extraordinary artistic sensibility, can illuminate the very essence of human existence. His quiet strength lay in his unwavering commitment to grappling with the most profound questions, leaving behind a legacy of unparalleled depth and enduring resonance. Fyodor Dostoevsky's enduring position in history transcends the mere categorization of a writer. He stands as a unique figure, often described not simply as an author, but as a prophet and a profound diagnostician of the human soul. His works delve into the deepest recesses of the human condition, anticipating philosophical currents and psychological insights that would only emerge decades later. He explored the landscapes of faith and nihilism, freedom and responsibility, guilt and redemption, with an intensity and foresight that continue to resonate profoundly. His voice, though often presented through the tumultuous inner monologues of his characters, remains quiet in its authority, yet immensely powerful in its impact. Dostoevsky did not offer easy answers or comforting platitudes. Instead, he presented humanity with a mirror, reflecting its most beautiful aspirations alongside its darkest impulses. He forced his readers to confront uncomfortable truths about themselves and the societies they inhabited, laying bare the moral and spiritual dilemmas that define existence. The themes he meticulously explored, the corrosive effects of ideological extremism, the struggle for meaning in a seemingly indifferent world, the intricate dance between reason and irrationality within the individual, remain strikingly pertinent. His insights into the nature of good and evil, the psychological underpinnings of crime, and the search for spiritual truth continue to provoke introspection in each generation that encounters his work. Even today, in a world vastly different from 19th century Russia, Dostoevsky's quiet yet powerful voice echoes through the ages. It invites us to pause, to look inward, and to grapple with the same fundamental questions he so passionately explored. He remains a guide through the labyrinthine complexities of the human spirit, an unwavering presence urging us towards a deeper understanding of ourselves and our place within the grand, often bewildering narrative of existence. His legacy is not merely a collection of books, but a continuous invitation to profound self-reflection. As our gentle journey through the life of Fyodor Dostoevsky now draws to a close, we can perhaps appreciate more deeply the quiet yet profound power of his enduring legacy. We have traversed the landscape of his existence, from the formative years in a Moscow hospital, through the awakening of his literary ambition, and into the chilling shadow of a mock execution. We witnessed his spirit forged anew in the harsh crucible of Siberian penal servitude and exile, an experience that would forever imbue his writing with an unparalleled depth of understanding regarding human suffering and redemption. We have seen how, amidst financial struggles and personal trials, Dostoevsky persevered, slowly rebuilding his life and his literary career. His unique philosophical and spiritual insights, born from his trials, found their purest expression in his later masterpieces, culminating in the expansive philosophical tapestry of the brothers Karamazov. His final years, marked by a measure of peace and a stable partnership, allowed him to synthesize a lifetime of inquiry into works that continue to challenge and illuminate. The quiet power of Dostoevsky's legacy lies not in thunderous pronouncements, but in the subtle, insistent echo of his questions within the chambers of our own hearts. He explored the timeless dilemmas of faith and doubt, good and evil, freedom and consequence, with an honesty that remains deeply unsettling and utterly essential. His characters, though products of a specific time and place, wrestle with universal human conditions, making his work a constant companion for those who seek to understand the complexities of the human soul. Now, as the echoes of his life and works gently recede, allow these reflections to guide you towards a peaceful state of rest. May the understanding of this extraordinary individual, who transformed his profound suffering into enduring art, settle upon you as a calm and comforting presence. Let the journey through his world soften the edges of the day, inviting a tranquil slumber.